Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the D and WhatIf, with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku took the scenic route to heroism. All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Chapter 1, Juxtapose. This is how it all starts. All Might, Izuku manages, just in time, to grab the attention of the number one hero before the man leaps off into the distance. Part of him wonders what would have happened if he was just a moment too late. It takes seconds for him to realize exactly what would have happened and is unbelievably grateful that he wasn't too late. He likes his stomach where it currently is after all. He got just what he wanted. All Might's attention. The man is giving him an odd look, and Izuku pulls back in embarrassment before bowing his head low. What is it, my boy? All Might asks in obvious curiosity, and Izuku starts to remember all too well just who it was that he had interrupted. I'm in a bit of a hurry, but I suppose I could let you ask one question. C-Can, HM. All Might leans closer to Izuku. I can't hear you. You have to speak louder. Can someone with a weak quirk become a hero like you? The next moment, as All Might is leaning back in shock, Izuku clamps his hands over his mouth as the gravity of his decision sunk in. He had just yelled at his favorite hero, like, at the top of his lungs. Red climbs up his cheeks to the tips of his ears, and Izuku takes a step back, his hands splayed open in front of him. Sorry about that. Didn't mean to. He hears something from his front. Ha 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 ha. All Might is laughing. He's laughing. Don't be so apologetic. I've heard louder voices than that. After all, I occasionally work together with Present Mike, and I'm not innocent of speaking too loudly either, so you have not offended me. Izuku sighs in relief. All right, that's good to know. So, Izuku lifts his head. Excuse me? All Might is looking at him curiously again. What is your quirk, young man? It's rare for people to answer me that kind of question for someone else. Most of those people are either talk show hosts mining for inspirational quotes or parents asking for their children. You are obviously neither, so you must be asking for your own quirk. Tell me about it then. Izuku gulps. All Might sure cut to the chase. Depending on your perspective, that was also something inspiring about him. Right now, it only makes Izuku feel foolish. And my quirk is minor banishment. He pulls pencil out of his pocket to show it at work. One moment, the pencil is whole, and the next it is as though someone took a bite out of it. Just a small chunk of wood, with the top of the pencil gone in what was a perfectly round cut. I can make up to 10 grams of anything I touch disappear permanently at one time. All Might's face is unreadable. Only up to 10 grams. Izuku nods, unable to look at his lifelong idol as he throws the pencil away. Quite honestly, it felt really shameful, showing him even this much. Such a useless power, and I can only activate it via touch. A large hand places itself on Izuku's shoulder. He raises his head, only to see a pained expression on All Might's face. Young man, I hate to say this, but... Half an hour later, Toshinori walks out of an alleyway not far from the police station he had just dropped the slime villain off to careful watch. For a moment, he gives himself a pat in the back for a job well done without any complications. Sure, it had been a bit touch and go there, as well as impolite, with him nearly running out of time in front of the police chief, leading him to hand the bottle containing the villain before running off without as much as a by your leave from the officers. But he had managed. And true, he could have dodged a whole having to hurry affair. But then it was worth it, spending those few minutes with that green-haired teenager. Toshinori stops walking for a moment, shaking his head. He had forgotten to ask the boy's name. He puts that issue aside for the moment. After all, what were the chances of him meeting the boy again? And thinks about how the entire situation had been. Young man, I hate to say this, but I think you should rethink trying to become a hero. Part of Toshinori hates the entire concept of heroes and villains. After all, he came from a generation that, while already witnessing the advent of heroes, had seen humanity from back before the problem of heroes versus villains wasn't as bad as it was these days. While Toshinori admired heroes himself as a kid, he hadn't seen a fight involving quirks down the streets every other day as a child. Heroes used to work once a week at most. These days, it was rare for a hero to go on patrol without being called in to foil a bank robbery, stop a purse snatcher, or deal with whatever mayhem the local villains could cook up. That in itself was worrisome, no matter how used to it the general population got. But things only get worse, more dangerous as the days would pass. Sometimes, Toshinori wakes up in his aching, deteriorating body, just to despair that the battle between heroes versus villains would never end no matter what he does as the number one hero, the symbol of peace. Even without the debilitating injury he has to endure every day, Toshinori worries for the coming generation. One for all was hardly the only torch to be passed down to the next generation, so was the entire villain problem. All the current generation could do was train the next one as best as they could and hope for the better, which brings Toshinori back to the subject of the boy. It had not been the first time Toshinori crushed a child's dreams. Again, part of Toshinori curses the concept of heroes and villains, planting in children's minds the need to become heroes at this day and age. No matter how necessary it was, it always left a bad taste in Toshinori's mouth to watch the next generation of Yui graduate, knowing that in less than a decade part of the batch will have paid the ultimate price for their work. To be a hero was to be a warrior after all, and a warrior always lives each day knowing it might be their last. In a way, by dashing the hopes of a child who cannot become that warrior, he saves yet another life, but that isn't what it feels like to Toshinori. In the end, what makes him any different from the villains he clobbers every day if he makes children cry? Toshinori knows that many had poured their heart and souls into achieving their dreams. It was more than just a career, it was their life. If he stomped all over those dreams, wasn't it like committing spiritual murder? Still deep in thought, he leaves a family mart with a small bag of yogurt and popsicles in hand. He eyes the cold treats in the plastic bag with a little odd smile. At least, the damage to his stomach couldn't stop him from treating himself like this every once in a while. All Might would have collapsed much earlier if he couldn't enjoy a simple popsicle. He rustles through his bag to take one for himself when he picks up the distressingly familiar sound of crying. As a hero, Toshinori was very familiar with all different kinds of tears. He'd been exposed to it all too often, and this seemed to be the loud, sobbing kind of crying, not one that seemed to be in physical distress. So Toshinori could have probably ignored it if his own feet weren't already bringing him to the direction of the sobbing. Part of Toshinori sighs with a bit of a smile at this. No matter how cynical he got about being a hero, in the end he was a hero after all. And when he arrives, he sees a familiar fluffy mop of green hair. The teenager in question is sitting on a bench next to a small puddle of his own tears. It's in the middle of a park, and there is no one in sight around as the sun is already starting to set. Instantly, Toshinori's hand tightens around the plastic bag he is carrying. Not even a second later, he is stepping forward. It looks like he is finding out the boy's name after all. Hash 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 hash. Izuku's heart is in pieces. After all, he just came from a meeting with his favorite hero, the one and only All Might himself. Normally, Izuku would be over the moon about the entire thing, had he not asked that question and got the answer that he expected but never wanted to hear. All Might said I could ever become a hero. That had been soul-rending to realize. For so long, Izuku had spent every waking moment hoping to become a hero out of his respect and admiration for All Might. For the man in question to shoot him down just like that, Izuku couldn't help but break into tears again as his hero's words continued to echo in his ears. A rustle comes from a bush, and Izuku stops sobbing for a moment to turn towards the source of the noise. He then has to jump up and hide behind the bench when a terrifyingly gaunt and skeletal man comes out of the shrubbery, carrying a plastic bag in his hands. Izuku's puffy eyes blink. The soft noise seems to have come from the gaunt man in front of Izuku. The man waves his thin, spindly arms in front of himself in what must have been an attempt to look unthreatening. I'm not a creeper. I'm just someone who heard a person crying, and my feet just took me here. The only reason why Izuku doesn't blush in complete embarrassment is just how tired he feels. So instead, he sits back down on the bench, not meeting the gaunt man in the eyes. Sorry if I interrupted your afternoon. To his surprise, the man sits himself to beside Izuku. The next thing he knows, he sees a blue, yellow, and red object held just above his nose. Want one? This is an ice cream bar. I eat them when I feel down. They're the kind of popsicles that split in two, so I can take half if you're worried that it's poisoned or something. Izuku doesn't know what to say to that, so he just takes hold of one of the popsicle sticks. The man holding the other one easily snaps the ice cream in two between himself and Izuku. The man doesn't hesitate to dig into his half. His brilliantly white teeth easily bit into the ice-cold treat, and Izuku soon finds himself following suit. For a few minutes, they just go on like that, eating their ice cream in silence. For some reason, Izuku starts to feel better. If this was why the man beside him ate ice cream when he felt down, Izuku could see the logic in it. But he couldn't imagine why this stranger felt like sharing this with some random crying teenager in a park he just met. Feeling better, the man asks. One of his hands is already offering Izuku yet another popsicle. This time the packet was still unopened. No, I couldn't. Izuku waves his hands in polite refusal. For some reason, he doesn't stutter in front of this man. Are you sure? The man asks again, still offering the popsicle. I still have 3 more in the bag. They might just melt if I don't eat them fast enough, which would be a terrible waste. I would like to have another then. Thank you very much. They continue like that, just for a while longer. And the man beside Izuku remains silent the entire time outside his offering another ice cream bar whenever they finished one. He never asks why Izuku was crying. He just sits there eating, not saying anything but lending him an ear without saying a single word. So Izuku starts to talk on his own. I met All Might today, he began, opening the ice cream pack. Chocolate. He saved me from a villain with a slime quirk. Contrary to what Izuku expects, the man reacts with anything more than a nod at the name of the one and only symbol of peace. If it was something like shock or excitement, Izuku would understand as a few hours ago. Was it really just a few hours ago? If someone did the same to him, his mind would be racing a mile a minute. But to evoke no reaction whatsoever. Who was this man? Then again, this man has been anything but ordinary the entire time, so it might be just a thing with him. Still, Izuku takes the nod as a sign to continue. So he carries on. I have always admired him, still do, honestly, because I want to become a hero. I need to become a hero like him, like All Might. Why? I beg your pardon. Why do you want? No, need to be a hero like All Might. Izuku blinks at the sudden question posed to him by the man sitting beside him. It was the only thing the man has said outside of sharing more ice cream. A familiar flame ignites itself at Izuku's chest, and he soon stands up, popsicle still in hand as he yells. Why? To help people, of course. People ask me about this so many times. If I have any other reason besides that, like fame or money. But do I really need a reason to become a hero besides wanting to help people? To risk life for the sake of someone else? Every word gushes out of him without a second thought. Izuku isn't lying about being asked about it a lot. After all, people had to ask why he was so determined to become one at some point. This time, it comes out a bit wearily than usual, but it somehow leaves the man dumbstruck for a moment. The moment passes quickly, as he soon recovers and coughs with what seems to be a smile. Your ice cream is falling apart. Izuku follows the man's gaze, and sure enough, his ice cream is about to fall off its popsicle stick. He rushes to stuff the rest of it into his mouth, and as he glances to the side, he is proven right. The man in front of him is smiling. The expression looked a little ghastly on the man's angular, sunken face, but in the end, the man was smiling at Izuku as though he respected his ideals. And after this trying day, was a little comforting. It might not be All Might, but knowing there was at least one person who thought so outside of his mother was comforting. Then why were you crying? The man asks. The bluntness of the question reminds Izuku a bit of All Might. Did he say anything to you? Izuku returns to his seat at that, not facing the man and instead glancing up at the skies dyed orange by the setting sun. Nothing I didn't ask for, Izuku whispers softly, as though a confession. I asked him, can someone with a weak quirk like me become a hero like him? Part of me already knew the answer. He feels a hand on his shoulder again, this time much smaller than the one he'd felt earlier that day. From what you're saying, it sure sounds like All Might could have been more tactful with what he said. The man beside him comments. His voice had a note of regret. Bitterness. Izuku couldn't pin down the emotion in his tone. He should have just not said anything, if all he had to say was just, no. The gaunt man blinks in confusion at Izuku's vehement denial. Izuku relaxes the fists his instantaneous reply had made, feeling even more tired, but he has to say this. The man before him has to know. I understand why All Might said that. Izuku murmurs, after a moment of silence. After a while, I've thought about it myself, what it's like being the symbol of peace. No, what is it to be like someone who has to watch over heroes? Like his mother, like Midoriya and co, who Izuku knows to worry a lot about him and his dream, who he knows that would keep on supporting him, no matter how much she would prefer him safe. But being safe was different from being happy for Izuku, and she knew that. He knew that she knew that, which was why she kept on cheering him on. To be a hero means to keep people safe, even from themselves, he continues to murmur beneath his breath, remembering a bad memory. And if that means dissuading someone from an apparent suicidal course of action, then All Might did the right thing by telling me what he thought. Izuku has to close his eyes to prevent an incoming onslaught of tears. You don't hate him for saying it? The man beside him speaks again, and Izuku makes a weak smile. I don't. You weren't there, You didn't see the look on his face. It was killing him to reply that to me, and his expression was of someone who was prepared to be hated for what he would say. He didn't want to do it, yet he did it anyway. A tear fell over his cheeks, unbidden. How can I not respect him even more for that? For trying to protect me from myself even though I might hate him for it. The man holds him close by the shoulder, allowing him to cry freely. For what feels like an hour, they stay like that, the entire situation quiet but no less emotional in its intensity as a stranger continues to comfort him without being asked. Until Izuku finally pulls away. By then, he has shed all of his tears and could finally start moving on. There are ways to help people outside of being a hero, Izuku wipes the corner of his eye as the man beside him says that. Doctors, teachers, repairmen, cooks, even politicians. All of these can be people that try to help others in their own way, with their own skill sets. For you who've lived most of your life dreaming of becoming a hero, it might seem impossible, but you are still young. You can still choose another path. Izuku blinks, the idea of becoming something other than a hero feeling almost alien after this long of wanting to be one. Plus, depending on you, you can still become a hero. This time, his eyes go wide, and he stands in shock at what the man before him just said. The man doesn't look at him though, continuing to speak as he focused his eyes onwards without meeting Izuku's eyes. If you are to be a student of Yui, there is an event that you must already know by now. It occurs once a year and is open to all of its students. The victor of the competition is granted the chance to become part of the hero class if they aren't already. The Yui Sports Festival, Izuku answers without having to be asked. But for that I'll have to first be part of Yui. And why would such a renowned school take someone like me? It's impossible unless you find someone to sponsor you in the general education program, and even then, you would still have to win the entire competition against all the future heroes and the rest of the students in Yui. The man continues, as though he was never interrupted. At least you've got the first one already. You just have to take the next step, if you are really sure about still becoming a hero. And even if you don't manage that, well then let's talk about it at that point. Izuku blinks. Did the man in front of him just say, "Huh, congrats, kid"? The man in front of him smiles that same ghastly and comforting smile. You've just caught the attention of an incoming teacher in Yui. Now, we've just got to get you signed up for the school properly, and from there you'll be in. Izuku yells in shock, before a familiar blush lights up his cheeks in embarrassment for doing the same thing twice in one day. I'm so sorry. Don't mind. The man before waves it off with an odd little expression on his face. I'm going to be working in the school where the loudest two people in the world would be by the start of next semester. I'll have to be used to loud voices at this point. Izuku has to ask, I just told you about my quirk, and what All Might had to say about it, so I probably won't. Forget what All Might, Faye. Old Might just told you earlier. The man interrupts, his voice he sure didn't know everything about you when he said it, and quirks aren't everything. You have the heart of a real hero. And don't let what anybody tells you stop you from thinking that. Kid, just trust in yourself, all right. At those words, Izuku can't help himself. He jumps forward to hold the gaunt man in front of him with a tight hug, and the man easily catches him. And though he takes a few seconds to stop flailing at the sudden hug, the man soon also returns it with what feels like a solemn promise of protection. Too bad it gets interrupted by a sudden surge of coughing from the older man. Izuku feels something warm, sticky, and metallic over his shoulder. He breaks off the hug to reach a hand over it, only to see his hand bloody. He snaps back in shock as he realizes the terrifying amount of blood coming from the other person's mouth. Mister, did I just do something bad? You're dying, I'm going to call the hospital. He is stopped by a hand gripping his wrist. The man before him, despite the blood coming from his mouth in large gushes, is calm. This happens a lot to me, don't worry. Honestly, it was a miracle that it took this long since I've met you. Izuku stares at his bloody face, then back at his phone, then at his face, and his phone. Delusions. Is this the lack of blood? Mister, stay with me. You're bleeding from the mouth. You are not all right. I have to call the ambulance. Needless to say, it takes Toshinori several more tries to calm the teenager down, and by then the sky is entirely dark and the teenager before him is left more than a little embarrassed again. Honestly, to Toshinori it would almost be endearing how the teenager looked in that moment, were not for the fact that the boy was still covered with his own blood. Hence, it felt more morbid than it had any rights to be. Toshinori takes out a tissue from his plastic bag, from under the light of the street lamp. At this point, they have stayed in this park for more than an hour, but Toshinori doesn't feel like in much of a hurry. Instead, he just wants to know more about this boy before him, whose name he still doesn't know. He had forgotten how it was to just want to help people. Such a pure reason, despite all of the things that should have made the teenager before him bitter. Honestly, the child before him was inspiring. And that was even without his passionate and sympathetic defense of Toshinori's famous alter ego. In that moment, Toshinori decided this boy would be his successor. He would have already offered one for all, were it not for the fact that the boy seemed to want to be able to prove himself to the world. Maybe in the future, maybe after a year of being a student in Yui, or if he won the sports festival before then, he would offer it, but for now Toshinori could still wait. He could still be All Might for a little longer, with this teenager by his side. Here, wipe yourself with this. I've taken to carrying disposable tissues everywhere I go at this point, just for this situation. The teenager just waves a hand at the offered tissues, seemingly embarrassed. And no, I'm fine. You're still covered with my blood, you know. I know it's messy, so don't feel embarrassed when I'm the one who should be. A look of realization flutters across the teenager's face. Toshinori starts to get the idea that he is about to see something that would surprise him. No, I am mean. I don't need a tissue. See, he points a finger at his own shoulder. And before Toshinori's own eyes, the shoulder, clothes and all, cleans itself bit by bit without any obvious effort whatsoever from the boy. The change is first unnoticeable, but then slowly the red and browns disappear from the boy's shoulder until it is finally left pristine. Wasn't the boy's quirk just minor banishment? My quirk lets me clean myself without much effort. By removing anything that might stain my clothes. I could clean it since I am always touching my clothes. It's a meaningless use of my powers, removing stains from clothing, but at least it makes it easier for my mom. Toshinori can't help but smile. Creative. If it was Toshinori who had such a quirk, he would have not noticed such a possible use. For this boy to think of something like that, he definitely had a mind that could easily beat out Toshinori's. That is for certain. He would definitely put one for all to great use in the future. The teenager before him blushes a bit more at the praise, rubbing the back of his head again, and Toshinori stands to his feet. He offers his hand. It is rare that he manages to say these words as himself, so he makes sure to do it just right. My name is Yagi Toshinori, future teacher of Yui. May I ask your name? The teenager's head snaps up, eyes bright and a smile on his face as he takes Toshinori's hand. My name is Midoriya Izuku, future general education student of Yui. Please take care of me. Chapter 2, A Fix. This is it. This is Izuku's first day in Yui. Toshinori-sen just dropped him off earlier on the front gates with a supporting pat on the shoulder. And though he has to bow his head and hide when he sees a familiar blonde mop of hair, he feels like he has achieved something just by being here. But he hasn't. Not yet. After all, this is just where it all begins. General Department students. Students for General Department. Follow me, please. A large costumed man announces, and the sight of a familiar spacesuit easily sets Izuku's heart aflame. Within seconds, a notebook is in his hands. Space Hero 13. Specialization, Search and Rescue. Age, 28. Birthday is February 3rd. Quirk is black hole, which allows them to create a vortex from their fingers that turns anything to dust. I can't believe I'm seeing them in person. A hand taps him in the back, snapping him out of his muttering. Izuku jumps a bit in shock before turning to look at the person that had managed to sneak up on him. Whoa there, for a slightly muscular guy, you're kind of jumpy, aren't you? A gray-haired teenager meets his gaze with a toothy smile, and idly Izuku notices a pair of square panels in the center of his palms. Was that related to the quirk of this person? Name's Kensei, Katsura Kensei, incoming freshman. What's yours? The teenager, Kensei, offers his hand, and with a moment's thought, Izuku shakes it. Am Midoriya Izuku, also freshman. He introduces himself, before blinking. Wait, how do you know about my musculature? I only just started physical training recently, and Toshinori-sen told me that it'll be a while longer before it would start to get obvious. A flash of red appears on Kensei's face, but it goes too quickly for Izuku's eyes to catch it properly. Ah, that'll be my quirk in action, scan. It lets me measure things that I can touch with these things in my hands. And as it's a little uncontrollable, I get flashes of unintentional information like that slip into my conversations sometimes. The teenager's face goes a bit red. Honestly, it's a little embarrassing that it came out this quickly. It's nothing special. Izuku can't help it. Stars are in his eyes. Really? That's your quirk? That is amazing. Don't you know all of the potential uses that kind of power can do in the right hands? Pardon the pun, depending on the limits of that kind of power. Kensei's eyes go wide, and Izuku realizes that he is babbling again. Instantly, his mouth shuts and he mimes zipping it up and throwing away the key in shame. The other teenager seems to not mind though. Man, I guess I was right for thinking you would be interesting. Mind you, I would want to know the rest of what you have to say later, but for now, Midori-san, I think we have to follow 13. Izuku blinks in shock as he remembers, you're right. He is about to rush off towards a direction when Kensei stops him by the shoulder and points him towards another one. Where do you think you're going? That's not the direction of general education. That's where the hero class go, Midori-san. Oh, Izuku feels embarrassed for a moment before finally realizing, Midori-san, like the nickname. It's a shortened version of your surname, but it also fits your hair. Now, come on, let's follow 13. We'll be late for our first school assembly. Kensei runs off ahead, and Izuku soon has to follow him. For someone who is only just a bit taller than Izuku, Kensei's legs are quite fast. In a few seconds, both of them are full on sprinting. Izuku has to smile though. Already, he is making a friend. Toshinori-sen would be so proud. Yagi Toshinori is a little worried. He had just dropped of young Midoriya earlier before having to leave to attend to his affairs as All Might, namely, joining the judges panel for this year's hero entrance exam and watching it all happen through cameras before coming to a decision over the incoming students. No matter the fact that he is currently All Might and thus respected by much of the faculty already, the truth is that Toshinori doesn't feel like he deserves being given such a responsibility so early. It is different, doing this in the field and in this place. As the symbol of peace, Toshinori has already taken the lead many times before, but not like this. After all, while the other teachers seem to have credible and insightful observations on the incoming students, Toshinori doesn't have anything to add beyond what he feels to be the obvious. And so far, the panel had gone on nicely without him saying anything. Was his presence even necessary here, when he could be watching over young Midoriya? You seem to be distracted. All Might. Ha am I. Toshinori easily falls into his All Might routine, a bright smile forming on his muscular face. I don't usually do this. I'm afraid I got lost in my mind in this strange new land called Joppa. Finish those words and I'll smack you, Eraserhead, or Shouta as Toshinori knew him, threatens him dryly before continuing to mutter, "What are you thinking about, All Might? You aren't usually so quiet unless you are thinking about something." Toshinori takes a moment, but as Eraserhead is one of the few people Toshinori trusts completely, he soon whispers, "Am I even needed here? All the other teachers here seem to already have it all at hand, and I can't seem to be able to find anything to add no matter what I try." He can't see it, but he knows that Eraserhead has a small smile on his face in that moment, just from his voice. All Might, as someone who is so used to succeeding, you might not know this, but that is how it is like for anyone for the first time. I myself had been the same, and so has everyone else in this room. Why else do you think the other teachers aren't asking you for anything? Toshinori blinks in realization. Then this is just a way for you to be introduced to being a teacher, to observe how the others do their work and to learn from there for yourself. Eraserhead nods, and Toshinori has to force himself to not look at the man face to face instead of keeping his eyes on the monitors. Even teachers have at some point need to be taught how to teach. And this is your first lesson, All Might Sensei. Toshinori accepts those wise words before, finally, seeing something noteworthy on one of the screens. Raising his voice a bit, he asks loudly, "Hey, does anyone know who that boy is from number 13? There is some shuffling of papers, and soon Ectoplasm speaks, or rather one of his clones do, as it holds a small document in its hands. Shinsu Hitoshi, Quirk, brainwashing. He needs the target to reply to him verbally for his quirk to take effect, plus control can be shaken off by sheer force of will. Otherwise, if activated, his quirk allows him to order around people without them remembering what happened." Someone whistles loudly in the room. Sure sounds like a pretty villainous quirk, doesn't it? The matter remains that he is here and knew it to be a hero. Eraserhead shoots that down quickly, though not without commenting. His failure to achieve anything yet in this test doesn't say much for him though. That's exactly it, isn't it? Toshinori thinks loudly as he says his opinion. The poor boy doesn't have much of a chance with how the exam is set this year. His power probably only works on human targets, correct? Faced with only robots for enemies, he can't do anything, when his quirk would have been perfect in settling real engagements against villains with minimal danger. Vlad comments calmly, "That would indeed be a pity to lose as a potential hero. In fact, in pure quirk ability, he might be equal to Endeavor's son in the right circumstances, perhaps even better." As he attempted to take control of the other candidates, at the mention of Enji's son, Toshinori can't help but glance at the relevant screen showing a familiar split-haired boy. Todoroki Shoto seems to be fending for himself well enough, so Toshinori turns back to the conversation at hand. Again, one of Ectoplasm's clones seemed to have pulled up the relevant video data, and the entire room watches as Shinsu Hitoshi takes control of Ingenium's younger brother Ida for a few moments to take down a robot. They then watched as the point was given towards the boy, leaving Shinsu with nothing from the encounter other than the knowledge that trying that again would be meaningless. So it seems he has. Pity that it doesn't help him one bit. Man, the poor kid, Midnight murmurs, hugging her own curves. I want to cheer him up personally after watching that. He could have at least tried to take down one robot by himself. Eraserhead says coldly, pointing out, if he had trained himself enough, he would have at least been capable of taking down one of the weaker robots with ease. Not everyone is as physically fit as us. You know that just as well as I do, Eraserhead. Toshinori has to add, before tacking on at the end, though I do admit the boy could be in much better physical shape than this. With some exercise, he would have managed that particular leap. Vlad offers his 2 cents, too used on relying on his quirk, perhaps? We've all been like that in that age, where we forget to take care of our bodies in the light of our quirks, and with this boy I can see how he doesn't see sense in physical training. Fools relying merely on their quirks will die off quickly. If he had at least kept himself trained properly, there would be some sense in giving him some leeway, but as he hasn't, I suggest pushing him into general education until he shapes up. Eraserhead concludes with that, and the other teachers nod, except for Toshinori, who merely blinks. That could happen. A student being placed in general education only to be prepared for the hero course later on. I thought that was only possible through winning the sports festival. Present Mike is the one who explains it to Toshinori. All Might-san, with all of your insightful commentaries so far we seem to have forgotten that you are new here. At the corner of his vision, Toshinori sees Eraserhead nod with a knowing smile. It isn't very well known, nor do we want it to be, but there are protocols for exactly this situation. If a student has the talent but doesn't apply it properly, we can make them spend their first few years in general education to shape them up. We put them on file to be put under watch, so if they get better we can take immediate action. The shame of failing something that they could have done better, it causes them to be inspired to do better, Eraserhead says, and Toshinori has to nod as he sees the logic. And when we deem them finally ready, do we let them enter the hero course quietly for the rest of their time here in UA? This is a different matter compared to transfers due to the sports festival. In this, ultimately the festival is merely just a logical ruse to get them more motivated to get better faster, as it rarely happens that a student outside of the heroic department wins the festival anyway. Toshinori asks, and they only find out about this ruse when they are considered ready. Eraserhead nods. If they don't ever get to be that, then they don't deserve this chance anyway. We're teachers of the next generation, not miracle workers. We can't focus on problem children too much if we don't want to risk the futures of the rest of the batch. How about those who start directly from general education? Toshinori asks, thinking of Izuku. He knows he told the boy about the sports festival. But if there is a different way, do they get this kind of chance? If they catch our attention, yes. But that happens so rarely that we might as well consider it inconsequential. After all, what potential hero will directly sign up for general education as opposed to the heroic department? And with that done, the rest of the room returned to what they were doing before, and this time Toshinori doesn't feel as worried. After all, he had just proven his own right to be here. And he has just found out something he knows his protege will be glad to know about. As for Izuku, he and his new friend are finally led with the rest of the general education students, as well as those from the Department of Support and the Department of Management, into a large hall capable of fitting more than half of the school. Separated into their departments, Izuku and all of his fellow students are introduced to an odd-looking principal. Whispers begin within the lines of conglomerated students. Was this someone with a particularly overt mutation quirk? If so, what kind of quirk was it then? And how could it have made this person their principal? At the top of the discussion is no one other than Izuku himself, who starts muttering to himself almost as a chant regarding the odd-looking principal. Much to Kensei's bemused looks at him at how fast the pace of Izuku's mind apparently goes regarding quirks. The principal stands on a podium before tapping the mic with animal paws. With a clearing of the throat that is actually more of a squeak than a hum, he introduces himself. Yes, it is I, your principal. I know it must be very strange. What am I, a human who is part animal, or an animal who is part human? Indeed, what kind of animal am I, or am I part of? Mouse, dog, weasel? I can't seem to be able to pick between any of them. As one, the entire collection of student minds goes to a halt. Despite the sudden oppressive silence, the principal seems overjoyed. Yes, that reaction is wonderful. Shock, amusement, astonishment, you can call it many things, but this Nedzu finds them all interesting, especially in regards with himself. 13. The space hero takes a step forwards from beside the odd to say the least principal to tap the mouse, dog, weasel, unidentified creature on the shoulder. Izuku could hear the fully covered teacher murmur, Principal Nedzu, you are confusing our new students. Please be more focused. Oh yes, of course. I can be rather scatterbrained. Somebody in the hall sighs loudly in relief at that. Pointedly, nobody wants to know who made the noise. Nedzu squeaks his throat again. Yes, let me try that again. My name is Principal Nedzu. And as the smarter ones between all of you should have realized by now, this is UA, considered no less than the hero academy in the world. You should all feel very honored to study in this school, as much as I do to be the one helping all of you take your steps towards your future. Izuku nods at this seriously, much to a smile from Kensei. At this moment, the heroic department is having their entrance exams. Yes, they are later than all of you, who have already taken your exams. After all, paper exams are easier to deal with for organizations than building robots and creating model cities. Several student eyes go wide at the implied test that was currently happening in that very moment. But the rest of the incoming freshmen are inside this hall. The Department of General Education, the Department of Support, the Department of Management. All of you have chosen to apply for one of these departments and have succeeded in doing so. Feel suitably proud for your achievement. After all, this is your first step in becoming heroes and helping people in your own way. Izuku's eyes widen in recognition at the familiar words that came from Toshinori-san. Was this principal where Toshinori had heard them from? Or did the principal hear it from Toshinori-san? Or was this something that people learn on their own? Several other students start whispering. Heroes? Weren't their departments precisely because they couldn't be heroes and thus not part of the heroic department? Yes, I know, that sounds particularly odd. Principal Nedzu smiles in front of it all, not at all offended by the whispering. I know that there have been some very derogatory ideas passed around regarding the other departments compared to the heroic department, but what do they know? This school is the best hero academy in the world. So as far as your principal is concerned, all of his students are heroes, not just the ones in the heroic department. The whispering goes quiet. in the awe and splendor inspired by the warriors in this modern society that we all call heroes. Most seem to have forgotten that these heroes aren't the ones holding this society together. He goes on, a little more softly, a little more wistful, and the entire congregate of students lean in closer to listen. From office workers, to store owners, fishermen, repairmen, to lawyers, and even the ones whom you have to pay your electricity bill, these are the invisible heroes in human society, don't you think? And what of teachers, like those in front of you, as well as doctors, psychiatrists, scientists, philosophers? Don't they all deserve acclaim for what they do? For while a good hero can one day save your life, for the rest of it a teacher could teach you how to live your life. Imagine how it would be like without all of these wonderful men and women in today's world. If we were to lose them, humankind will be no more than rabid animals repeatedly going at each other's throats, and well, as an animal myself, I would like state my opinion on how good it feels to not do so. Izuku blinks, snapping out of the trance he had been just in. Did the principal just call himself an animal? The other students seem to have also noticed this bit of wordplay, as Nedzu nods to himself on his podium. Yes, this Principal Nedzu is indeed an animal. More precisely, that of a rat, only one that is blessed with beyond human intellect by the rare formation of a quirk. So I believe I have the authority of being allowed to say this about society. On how foolish it is that we have this obsession to become warriors when precisely what makes people human is their capability to resist going into violence. As much as it has become a necessity, there is no need to glorify it more than it has to be. That was a little hard to swallow. If Izuku is getting this right, Nedzu wasn't just complimenting the departments outside that of the heroic department. He was actively deriding the heroic department, considering it only necessary as opposed to being something worth of being proud of. While it was inspiring to hear what he thought of the other departments, about the heroic department, was that all these is to being a hero? Just violence? Izuku shakes his head, not even listening anymore to what the principal has to say. No, there was more to being a hero than violence. There is honor in Izuku's dream, in his life goal that Toshinori-san has given him a second chance in. He would disprove Principal Nedzu wrong. He would become as great as All Might, become the hero, the symbol of peace. You seem more than a little fired up, Kensei notes beside him. And Izuku jumps a bit, realizing that he has forgotten that the other teenager was standing beside him. Man, you're still pretty skittish, huh? At least you're excited. The slightly wistful tone the other teenager says that makes Izuku feel a bit curious. You aren't excited to become a student here in Yui. The gray-haired teenager shakes his head, a strangely somber look on his face. No, to me, becoming part of Yui was always just a given. Kensei doesn't say more than that. Izuku blinks as the moment just disappears. As the next instant Kensei is smiling wildly again. Soon a hand places itself over the top of Izuku's head, shaking his hair. Now, come on, Midori-san. The principal has finally finished talking. I'm excited to see the dormitories of the General Education Department. Tomorrow, we finally start classes, so I feel like getting a nap. Izuku realizes, he's right, the rest of the students are breaking apart into departments again, heading off in different directions as separate groups. About what Kensei just said though, don't we have to see the actual faculties of the General Education Department first though? Like the location of the building, where do we go for things, places like that? That sounds like a lot of work we can just find out tomorrow. Can we just skip it and head to the dormitories ourselves? Katsura-san, we can't do that. And we can't even get into the dormitories until we get our keys by the end of orientation. Oh, I'm sure we can subvert that particular bit of security. The two of them end up joining the general education orientation anyway. While Kensei, much to Izuku's horror, has some very interesting suggestions regarding the use of his scan quirk in the art of lockpicking, Izuku manages to convince the other teenager to not spend their first day in Yui breaking the law. In retrospect, Izuku should have noticed that the other teenager was pretty odd earlier. In another part of the campus, a certain blonde teenager is cracking his knuckles. Miniature explosions occur as he does so, characteristic of the teenager's quirk, and soon Bakugo Katsuki is looking up in the orange skies. In that moment, he recalls another time just like this with orange skies, of a crying teenager and a gaunt man's heart-to-heart conversation that he had somehow managed to accidentally eavesdrop on, and his fists clench. The next moment, there is an explosion. I have a weak quirk my ass. For someone very observant, the nerd is blind to himself. Bakugo curses his own previous failure to see, as well as All Might's apparent blindness to a certain green-haired teenager's potential. I can't have him wasting his time in the general department. Deku has no place in this world other than where I can see him. Part of himself stings with the faint taste of guilt, but he ignores it with practice. Look out, Deku. I'm going to find you. And when I do, I'm going to make sure you will get your proper place above all these secondary characters. You may be avoiding me now, but I'll catch up with you soon enough. It is an oath. I'm not just aiming to become better than All Might. I need someone who I can fight me for it, and that's Deku. Nobody else deserves to get the chance to be my rival. Chapter 3 Weld. In the past, whenever Izuku fantasized of being part of Yui, he had always imagined it to be a school life fraught with dangers and exciting situations straight out of a story. So far though, what Izuku is experiencing as a general education student even after a week of classes isn't. Intellectually, he already knows that it is only logical that things didn't go like that of a story, complete with conflict and drama. After all, forget how Yui is the safest school there is with all of the security measures in place to keep out villains. Izuku is not even part of the heroic department. It only makes sense that it would all be not like what he had imagined. Instead, the general education department is just like middle school, only bigger and without the mistreatment he had faced back then. With a more varied cast of teachers, some just flamboyant and others actual heroes. Actual hero Esoganshishomrum and Quirk Theoritataris Space Hero 13 Haukenhebasalaki. Other than the teachers, the faculties and materials given to the students are pretty amazing too. The General Education Department has the largest archive of first-hand information about heroes, villains, and quirks that Izuku knows, and Kensei already had to pull him out of the place by force several times. If the other teenager hadn't, Izuku couldn't say that he wouldn't have moved out of the dormitory by now and camped inside the building. As for the classmates, honestly, with all the things Izuku could do inside the large campus, he hasn't interacted much with his classmates yet, outside of Katsurasen. Yes, he has exchanged some banal conversations with several people, as well as made a few acquaintances, but friends, not so much. It takes nearly all of his time these days just to meet up with Toshinori. What the man was a teacher of, and of what department, Izuku still doesn't know and he doesn't quite ask. And combined with doing what was required of him, Izuku just doesn't have the free time. Speaking of his classmates though, back then during the start of the second day of classes, a new member of the General Education Department had transferred into Izuku's class. That is how Izuku gets his first impression of Shinsu Hitoshi. Everyone, this is Shinsu Hitoshi, and he will be part of our class starting today. 13 Sensei speaks, and the class turn their heads as one to the newcomer. Shinsao-kun, could you introduce yourself to the rest of your class? My name is Shinsu Hitoshi. The teenager bites out, looking for the world like he wanted to be anywhere else other than their classroom. I would say it is nice to meet you all, but that would be lying. Their teacher takes on a scolding air. It is a very odd sight, considering the spacesuit they were still wearing in homeroom. Shinsao-kun, that is very rude. Introduce yourself properly next time, please. You will need to interact with your classmates in the future. Somehow, I highly doubt that, sensei. Needless to say, Shinsu doesn't make a good impression with his classmates, and Izuku can only watch as the other teen is isolated from the rest of the class. Part of him wants to approach the teenager. Izuku believes that no one really deserves solitude, even if they literally asked for it like Shinsu did. But as it is, Izuku really just doesn't have the time. So when Izuku's favorite subject, Quirk Theory class, hands them all a group project to do, Izuku takes the chance to attempt recruiting their reclusive classmate, along with support from Kensei. Izuku walks up to the other teenager's desk, before tapping his fingers over the wooden surface. The action shakes its owner awake, having been napping in the middle of class hours. Shinsao-san raises his head, eyes droopy and filled with exhaustion, only to meet the faces of a nervous Izuku and a grinning Kensei. As Shinsao-san, Izuku speaks first. Would you mind joining us for this group project 13 Sensei just gave us? Shinsao-san, in return, only gives them an empty stare. What project? Izuku blinks, for some reason having not expected that sort of response. Though in retrospect he should have, considering the other teenager had been asleep while 13 Sensei gave the announcement. Contrasting him, Katsurasen breaks out to loud guffaws. Katsurasen actually breaks a bit into tears. I thought you were just pretending to be asleep so nobody would try to talk to you, but you were actually sleeping. Man, I like you, you've got guts. Izuku turns to dissuade Katsurasen from making any further noise, having noticed Shinsao-san's pain wincing at the other teenager's loud voice. But then Shinsao-san manages to preempt him with a question. You're Katsura Kensei, am I right? Katsurasen's eyes narrow in a smile as he speaks. Yeah, that's my name, don't wear a do. Izuku's eyes widen as in the middle of responding Shinsao-san's question, Katsurasen's expression suddenly falls flat before the gray-haired teenager goes silent. Katsurasen. What just happened? Shinsao-san's voice interrupts Izuku yet again. Tone sharp and acerbic as he orders, Katsura Kensei, briefly explain to me the circumstances of this project Midoriya-san was just talking about earlier, as well as why you two approached me, in calm tones and a moderate level of voice. Izuku has never heard Katsura-san speak as robotically as he does in that moment. 13 Sensei gave us all a week to prepare a group report regarding the quirk of one hero of our choosing. The group can be as small as just 2 people, with a maximum of 4 people depending on the effort involved. However, as Mentorship here had aspired for us to prepare a report detailing not just 1, but 3 heroes, he had suggested to me that we find 2 other people to join our group, which is why we approached you. Having said all of that in one go, Katsurasen then stops to take a deep breath before continuing. He had also expressed worry that you could be feeling isolated in class, so having wanted to talk to you long before this, he took this chance to try for the 2 of us to get to know you. Katsurasen blinks, and then suddenly the other teenager is back to normal, if looking a little confused at what just occurred. Shinsaosen, on the other hand, gives Izuku an unreadable look. Izuku can feel himself blushing to the tips of his ears. What just happened? Katsurasen asks, not noticing Izuku's expression. It's like the past few seconds just went by without me there. That was my quirk, Shinsaosen answers, and Izuku snaps out of his mortification to give the other teenager a very attentive look. Katsurasen also waits for the purple-haired teenager to say more, but Shinsaosen remains quiet. Okay, I want to know more about what happened, but if you don't want to say more, then... Kensei closes his mouth just in time for Izuku to start muttering things beneath his breath again. Having entirely expected it coming, he leans in for a bit to snatch several whispers of manipulation, voiceable, and lack of memory. That done, he turns back to an astonished Shinsu. So, you have a manipulation kind of quirk then? With vocally responding to you as the trigger. Mind, that was very rude of you to just use it on me out of the blue and then not explain things properly. But Midorichin here is really good at analyzing quirks, and I was kind of rude myself earlier, so I'll just let that pass. He pauses, an uncharacteristically solemn expression on his face. Just don't use it on me again, alright? I've got some bad memories regarding being the victim of some quirks. Point to Shinsu. A contrite expression does form on his face. I'm sorry about that. You were speaking really loudly and I just woke up, so... Kensei waves it off, a smile on his lips again. It's alright, didn't I just tell you that? Izuku finally returns to the present. The conversation so far reels quickly in his head, and with a moment's thought, he blinks at Katsurasen. Midorichin, you were being really cute, so I thought it fit you more. Visibly not wanting to consider that statement, Izuku turns his attention back to Shinsaosen, whose face is back to neutral. Asks Shinsaosen, so, about joining our group. Shinsaosen's eyes flicker over Izuku and Katsurasen, openly studying them. Midoriya-san, are you really serious about trying to befriend me? Because let me tell you, as I've told the rest of this class before, I'm not interested in making friends here. Izuku opens his mouth, but Katsurasen stretches an arm protectively over him. Him too, Shinsaosen. I'm not planning on using my quirk on him. Do not worry. Shinsaosen places his hand over his face, an air of irritation surrounding him for just a moment so quick that Izuku almost thinks that he just imagined it. I'm just asking here, because I'm honestly surprised that anybody would bother. Nobody deserves to be alone, Shinsu-san. Izuku suddenly shouts, causing the other 2 to snap towards him. At the sudden attention he receives, Izuku curls in a bit, but forges on, I know you want to be alone, and yes, I understand that some people are really like that sometimes. But isn't it better that you have the choice of friends to talk to than never having that choice at all? It is, after all, why for all this time Izuku keeps his friendship with Bakugo, affectionately named Kaken. For all of the negative facets of their relationship, Izuku knows that if he wants to talk to someone, Bakugo is there for him to talk to, even if only to deride what he says the next moment. Part of Izuku then remembers the current state of said relationship though and winces inwardly. Shaking his head, he returns to attention to see that Katsurasen is giving him a fond look while Shinsaosen is looking at him as though his body just turned green like his hair. Shinsaosen seems to have to force himself to speak. Even then, I cannot promise to accept the offer of friendship. I simply do not have the time for it. Izuku wilts, and Katsurasen opens his mouth to say something, but Shinsaosen pushes on. However, as for the matter of joining your team, I am willing to accept, despite what some people in this class might think. I'm intent on achieving high grades for all of my classes, and for that your plan of going above and beyond what is asked for us by the teacher is appealing. Having said all of this, Shinsaosen nods before turning to Izuku with a curious look on his face. Your quick breakdown of my own quirk earlier also tells a lot about your analytical skill. Honestly, do you even really need me? The green-haired boy pumps his fists in success. Of course, while I do pride myself in analyzing quirks, not that I think I'm the best or anything, just a little good at it at this, for some reason unknown to him, Katsurasen shakes his head with a smile. That's only part of the presentation. Katsurasen here knows a lot about mechanics, so we were planning something that is a bit more interactive than a paper report, but for that we need materials and more hands. And more people means more work can be done faster. Shinsaosen nods in understanding. I see. You already have an idea of what we are to do, Katsurasen? Who do you think I am? Of course I do. Katsurasen swipes his thumb at the tip of his nose, chest out proudly. But then he curls forward, hand beside his mouth as he speaks Sadavos at Shinsasen. Izuku smiles at the other teenager's antics. But please, don't refer me like that too. Katsurasen makes me sound old. It's hard enough trying to convince Midorichin here to call me by my first name. But Katsurasen, Izuku wails, his cheeks red at being called Chan again. He hides his face in his hands in his mortification. That will be very rude of me to refer you so familiarly. Kensei-san then. Shinsasen ignores Izuku's outburst. All right, I'm in, if you two are so already well underway with the plans. Any ideas for our fourth member though? Izuku raises his head. Another person coming in mind for this. Like Shinsasen, Izuku has wanted to talk to this person for a while now. And again, like Shinsasen, this group project is the perfect chance to do so. Actually, I do. Should I go invite her now? He then blinks, remembering shyly that the other two might be interested in getting to know this fourth person too. Katsurasen, Shinsasen, if you two would want to come along. Izuku can only watch Shinsasen's eyes go wide as Katsurasen is suddenly there with his arm hanging over their newest groupmate's shoulder. He winces in sympathy for the other teenager in that moment. He knows Katsurasen can be rather touchy-feely sometimes. Actually, Midorichin, I think you can do it well enough on your own. But, don't worry. Katsurasen is smiling at Izuku, even as Shinsasen keeps attempting to escape the other teenager's grip. I'll take this chance to explain to Shinsasen here what I plan to do for the project. I trust you can do this, so go. We'll be all right. Izuku doesn't feel as confident in himself as Katsurasen apparently does in that moment, but he nods anyway. All right, I'll be back soon. And just like that, he leaves, not wanting to disappoint the open trust Katsurasen had just shown for him. You know, you're not subtle as you probably think in wanting to get me to talk to you without Midoriya-san around, Shinsu states as soon as Midoriya leaves the room. At this point of time, the rest of the class is out on lunch break, so only Shinsu and Kensei is left in the classroom by the time the green-haired boy leaves. I wasn't trying to be. Kensei smiles, the expression almost predatory now that it's just the two of them. Not that Shinsu is surprised. At this point, he is very well versed in identifying facades when he sees them. Midorichin doesn't need to hear this, which is why I convinced him to leave, but other than that, I don't care what you might think. I've noticed, Shinsu says dryly. The other teenager, for all of his cheery words earlier, is actually still seething a bit inside at Shinsu's use of brainwashing on him. Some guilt remains at the back of his mind, nevertheless. You're very protective of him, aren't you? Yeah, he kind of inspires that in people. Kensei actually looks both fond and surprised as he says this to Shinsu, as if he himself can't quite believe it. Seeing the other teenager though, Shinsu could, though he is still pretty sure he would be unaffected by it in their incoming project with Midori. It's been only a while since I've met him, but nowadays I keep finding myself acting as his keeper without even realizing it until I'm halfway into pulling him out of the archives or something. Shinsu can't help himself. He snorts at that image, though he realizes it must be rather tiring. Taking care of Midoriya must be a full-time job. So, what is it that you want to talk to me about? Kensei meets Shinsu in the eyes and starts. Look, I know what you've just said about not wanting friends. Shinsu thinks he sees where this is going. I'm not going to pretend to be buddy-buddy with Midoriya just because you asked me to. Shinsu isn't the kind of person to do things because people asked him to do it. Call it irony, considering his quirk, but Shinsu hates being ordered around, as though somebody else could tell him to do or who he could become. He has enough of that. With all of his experiences of being treated like a future villain by so many people, the fact that Shinsu hates lying is also another reason as to why he rejects this idea so outright. From what Shinsu can see, Midoriya is really the kind of earnest person with the honesty that he doesn't even need consciously do just to achieve. Midoriya doesn't deserve Shinsu pretending to be his friend, when Shinsu knows he won't even put the proper amount of effort into it. It's not that. Kensei actually shakes his head at Shinsu knowingly, as though there is something Shinsu isn't aware of here, but then he grins at Shinsu. And actually, you're kind of rude, you know, interrupting me like that. Then again, I'm not exactly innocent of the same crime. Actually, I'm even worse than you at that. Shinsu rolls his eyes. He is already starting to get the gist of the other teenager's personality. At this point, Kensei is probably being long-winded just to irritate him. Get to the point, Kensei-san. Oh, still going to call me by that. Nice. Kensei sends him a thumbs up before going back to serious mode again. Anyway, back to the point. I'll be honest, I'm not exactly pleased myself about him trying to be friends with you. No offense, but you'll be a lot of trouble. Shinsu snorts, some offense taken anyway. But who am I to try and stop Midorichin from making friends? Shinsu deadpans, at this point a little irritated with the presumption of him making friends with Midori, a reasonable one that would try and speak some sense to him about trying to befriend people that are uninterested in making friends. Kensei smirks at him. Do I even look like the reasonable sort to you? I'll take that question to be rhetorical. Shinsu continues with the same exact tone. With that said, he shakes his head. Anyways, is this all? Because I am not really that interested in your opinion of Midoriya-san befriending me. After all, as I have repeatedly stated, I am not going to be Midoriya's friend, and I do need to get my lunch. He moves to stand up, picking his bag, when Kensei speaks again. That's precisely it, Shinsu-san. This is me warning you. Shinsu freezes mid-motion before leaning back into his seat again. Is this a threat? Something along the lines of if you hurt him? While Shinsu doesn't know a lot about friendships, he has seen movies, and to be honest with how Kensei treats Midoriya, he won't surprised if this is something similar to the so-called shovel talk. Which is ridiculous, because Midoriya isn't some kind of girl, and Shinsu isn't said girl's prospective boyfriend. And that only leaves the idea that Kensei is treating him as a possible threat to Midoriya's well-being. And being treated like a possible threat only means one thing to Shinsu. He is being treated like a future villain again because of his quirk. Because let me tell you, I don't take it very well when people expect me to do things as though I'm some kind of villain. Part of Shinsu winces after he says that. In retrospect, that sounded exactly like the kind of thing a villain in hiding would say. Contrary to his expectations though, Kensei only smiles. Nope, my warning is that, your wish of not befriending Midoriya-san, that this will all be just a one-time thing. He opens his arms to the side, palms up and shaking his head. The moment you agreed to join our group, you've kind of already sealed your fate in that, man. Shinsu relaxes at that, before he realizes what Kensei is implying. What you mean is, no matter what I do at this point, I'll end up befriending Midoriya anyway. Kensei smirks. Exactly. Pardon me if I don't believe you. You'll believe me soon enough. Kensei crosses his arms, chin up as though utterly convinced in his own belief. Shinsu can only shake his head at the stupidity before the other teenager starts to speak again. Anyway, about that part of you hating to be treated like a villain. Yeah, how about no? I don't want to talk about it. And this time, yes, I am willing to use brainwashing to forcefully end this conversation if I have to. The only reason why Shinsu hasn't used his quirk just yet for this entire conversation is his guilt for the look he put on Kensei's face earlier. And though that guilt is enough for Shinsu to resolve to not use his quirk on both Kensei and Midoriya unless absolutely necessary, being pressured to speak about things that he doesn't want to talk about is one of those scenarios that he considers worth using his quirk for. That's your quirk's name then. Cool. When will this teenager before him react in the way Shinsu expects? Normally people would be acting negatively at Shinsu threatening to use his quirk on them. And don't worry, I can read between the lines well enough without you having to explain things to me. Like I've said before, I've had some experiences myself. And anyway, speaking of quirks, here you go. What's this? Pain reliever. Your entire body is sore, correct? Shinsu blinks in shock. When did Kensei notice that? He thought that he had been hiding the results of his nightly training sessions well, even if it left him feeling wrung out and falling asleep in class. You might want to drink that. I normally carry them for Midoriya these days. He likes to train just like you do and sometimes returns to the dormitory needing them. That certainly answers why Kensei was carrying a pain reliever, but you'll probably want to ask him if he can get his trainer to write a plan for you too. You'll do better with someone who knows what they are doing telling you what to do. Shinsu shakes his head. That is all well and good. In fact, Shinsu makes a mental note to ask Midoriya exactly that in the future, but as for how Kensei knew, how did you know? No, wait, let me guess, your quirk. In retrospect, it had been obvious from the beginning. How else could Shinsu explain Kensei knowing what he couldn't know? Yep, thought so. And you're not going to tell me more than that. Right, you know, for someone I don't want Midoriya to befriend, we think along the same lines a lot. I wonder what that says about me. Shinsu, for once, doesn't open his mouth to say anything. He doesn't want to touch that issue with a 10-foot pole if he doesn't have to. ###. In retrospect, Izuku should have realized the issue of him going alone to invite the fourth member of their team into joining them for the project, that he should have insisted on making the other two accompany him, as opposed to walking into the lunch rush cafeteria only to stop in his tracks at once he found the person he was looking for. After all, the person he is looking at right now is a girl. I can't believe I forgot that she was a girl. Wait, no, I did remember that she was a girl, only that it didn't hit me earlier that I don't know the first thing about talking to girls. What am I going to do now? Katsura entrusted me with this. So deep in his panicked thoughts, Izuku is so distracted that he doesn't notice people around him giving him odd looks, as well as the fact that the object of his attention is approaching him. The next thing he knows, someone is poking him from behind at the shoulder. Izuku snaps around to see the girl that he was planning to invite shaking her head, with her hands pressed over her ears. Yamato Megumi-san, you're here. Yamato-san only nods, her eyes squeezed tight. Why yes, you were looking at me, so I thought I should. Recognizing the situation immediately, Izuku takes a step back and bows deeply in apology. I'm sorry if I did it again. I keep doing this to you. I'm really, really sorry. Yamato-san only shakes her head, a small smile blooming on her face. It's alright. Izuku just feels a lot guiltier at that. At this point, he really should be better at this. Yamato Megumi is one of Izuku's classmates. Some time ago, he had accidentally bumped with the girl, only for her to suddenly collapse on the street while Izuku was panicking over what to do. When Izuku was about to call the teachers, or the ambulance, or something, the girl then stretched out her hands to catch Izuku's wrists. And, I'm alright. That was how Izuku got introduced to Yamato-san's quirk. Back to the present. 10 minutes after Yamato-san catches him staring at her in the cafeteria, the two of them settle down into an out-of-sight table. Izuku takes the chance to buy his own lunch, and soon enough, the two of them are quietly eating together. Indeed, it is so quiet that it is awkward. Izuku chews half-heartedly on a piece of tonkatsu when he tries to kickstart the conversation. Right, in cases like this, talking about food was the first thing to do, right? Yamato-san, does your food taste? He blinks. Actually, I don't recognize it. What is that you're eating? Yamato-san freezes in between chewing. And beneath her glasses, Izuku could see her blush momentarily. IIT's sauteed cow tongue, Midori-san. The awkwardness only intensifies as Izuku doesn't know what to say to that. They spend some more time just like that, turning their attentions back to their own food with Izuku scolding himself at his faux pas, until Yamato-san finally stretches her hand over the table. She tilts her face in a silent offer. And though part of Izuku panics at the idea of holding a girl's hand, he stamps that panic down and takes several deep breaths. Once he feels sufficiently calm, Izuku smiles back at Yamato-san and takes her hand. The connection forms as soon as their hands touch. Is this better, Midori-san? Yamato speaks to him in his mind, and Izuku can't help but feel admiration for the girl in front of him again. Oh no, you're praising me too much. To be honest, most people don't like having someone else in their heads. Izuku blushes at being caught thinking about Yamato-san's quirk, but manages to forge on. Still, your quirk is really rare, isn't it? Quirk, touch-based telepathy. Even if you can only skim other people's thoughts, there are a lot of potential uses for it. True, Yamato-san admits, but that's only if I can prevent myself from getting overwhelmed by other people's thoughts and emotions all the time. Other than that, it's useless. Izuku comforts. It's alright, Yamato-san. Part of it is my fault anyway, so don't blame yourself for it. Nevertheless, Yamato-san shakes her head, with her long black hair waving behind her in its braid. Midori-san, I believe you were here to ask me something. Is this about the group project 13-sensei gave us to do? Izuku nods excitedly. Yeah, I was thinking of inviting you to our group. Katsura-san and I managed to recruit Shinzao-san earlier, if you're curious as to who is in the rest of our team. And as for what we're planning to do, well, I believe it's better if I just show you. It took Izuku a lot of practice with Yamato-san in the past to get the concept down. But this time it only takes Izuku a bit of effort to send his and Katsura-san's plans for the project not as words, but as ideas and images. Yamato-san closes her eyes for a moment. I see. So you want me to join your group so you can do all of what you have planned within the time given. If it's not a bit presumptuous, Izuku adds a bit worriedly, if you have a team you're in already, of course that's fine. And I'm not pressuring you to join us or anything. No, it's not that at all. I'm actually glad to be invited. I was wondering what to do about it considering I couldn't find anyone willing to be my partner. Yamato-san responds just as fast, taking care of Izuku's worries. The only problem I have is that the rest of the team are all guys, right? I would be the only girl. Izuku scrunches up his face at that. Yeah, what about it, Yamato-san? Yamato-san actually smiles at his reaction to her question. Midori-san, truly you are one of a kind. Izuku goes red. Thank you. If you'll be there. And you trust these people, Yamato treads on, her mental voice deep in consideration. All right. I trust you, Midori-san. And it'll be only all right to extend that trust properly. If you don't mind having me, I'll join your group. Izuku's eyes go wide in happiness. You won't regret this, Yamato-san. And just like that, Yamato-san pulls her hand away and the connection breaks. And this time, when they quietly turn back to eating their lunches, the atmosphere isn't as awkward. In fact, it feels a little warm to Izuku, for some reason. Skip forward for 3 days, and Izuku's newly formed study group is well underway with their chosen group project. The choice of heroes to focus on had been quick. Izuku, of course, wanted to give All Might a commemoration, while Katsura-san and Yamato-san thought that 13-sensei only deserved some appreciation for teaching them as well as doing rescue work. There was some discussion on who would be the third, but Shinzao-san then sealed the deal by arguing that the rest of the team had a personal choice, which meant that he had the right to choose who was their third hero. Izuku only knows a little bit about Eraserhead, but if Shinzao-san thought that he deserved some credit, then who are the rest of the team to argue? And though there are some issues between several of the members of the group, namely between Katsurasan and Yamato-san, Izuku feels very optimistic that they would manage to do it all just in time. Who would have expected it though, that Katsurasan was terribly shy around girls? Honestly, with how he would turn red and clam up around Yamato-san, Izuku feels like he should ask the other teenager about it at some point. Shinzao-san, on the other hand, seems to be only finding Katsurasan's interaction with Yamato-san amusing. Surprised, Izuku was not. So, Kensei-san, where does this go? Shinzao-san asks their mechanical expert. And Izuku has to hide a smile on his face at how casual it all seems to be between the two. You're the one who designed this whole thing. Here, Shinzao-san, Katsurasan responds, hands greasy as he holds a monkey wrench towards a part of what they were building. When we attach this thing to that, when we trip this switch during the report, it would activate our special surprise for everyone to see. Here, let me show you how to put it in. With Yamato-san quietly working on the software part of their report with Izuku, finding out that the only girl of their team had a bit of experience with programming was a boon, the team is like a well-oiled machine. So of course, that is just the moment that it all changes. Found you. Izuku jumps, recognizing that voice. The rest of the team freeze up at the loud noise, and they all turn as one to see a blonde stomping towards their direction. Izuku's heart starts pounding. He isn't ready for this moment. How can he face Bakugo now, after all this time? Kaka, Deku, you little shit, you've been hiding from me. Katsuki Bakugo roars, with his every footstep making a miniature explosion until he finally stops in front of Izuku, Bakugo's glare set just over Izuku's cowering face. How dare you avoid me for all this time? Didn't I tell you to meet me the moment we both arrived in Yui? The next thing Izuku knows, an explosion happens just beside Bakugo's face. But Kaken doesn't do that, not unless, Izuku thinks, before turning to his and Bakugo's right, where a partially melted monkey wrench lay. The blonde in front of Izuku is seething, with his attention turned to one member of Izuku's team. No, not one member. All three of them. Excuse me, I don't know you, but can you unhand our team leader this instant? Katsurasan asks, flanked by both Shinzao-san and Yamato-san. You're being rude here. Normally people would introduce themselves properly. Who are you shitheads? Bakugo glares. How dare you interrupt my talk with Deku? Despite the question being aimed at them, it is Izuku who answers, a tired look on his face even as Bakugo holds him by his collar. They're my friends, Kaken. My friends, he says weakly. Now, can you let me go? I'm going to need to breathe properly at some point. With that, Bakugo drops Izuku without much preamble, leaving him to fall on his backside on the ground. With a gasp from Yamato-san, Izuku's groupmates rush by his side, with Katsurasan pressing one of his palms on Izuku's side as Shinzao-san glares at the blonde in front of them. This was certainly turning out to be a horrible first impression Kaken was making with his new friends, Izuku thinks. Chapter 4, Dissociate. So, who are you? Shinzao-san speaks first, still glaring at the blonde before him. You've barged into our group, attacked Midoriya-san before the rest of us, and even now you haven't even bothered to apologize or introduce yourself. So who are you? Izuku inwardly begs that the other boy isn't planning to use his quirk on Bakugo. That would only make things worse, he knew. God bless all that is holy. When Bakugo responds, Izuku's worst fears don't come to be. Why should I even bother introducing myself to general trash like you three shits? My business here is only with Deku. Now go and fucking scram. Kaken, no. It's almost as though he wanted Shinzao-san to use his quirk on him, before Shinzao-san actually attempts to force Bakugo into something embarrassing. Izuku speaks in an effort to pacify the situation. Kaken, don't be rude. And then forcibly ignoring how Bakugo's nostrils flare at being scolded like a child, Izuku makes use Katsurasan's hand as leverage to stand back up to his feet to face to his group, coincidentally turning his back to his childhood friend. And everyone, this is Bakugo Katsuki, my friend from way back when we were children. He's a little prickly. Izuku wants to use explosive, volatile, and very likely to explode on you but knows better than to dare with those particular puns. But I hope you guys don't mind him too much. Kaken's just not very sociable. I would introduce you guys to Kaken, but I think he won't even bother remembering your names. Thankfully, Katsurasan only snorts at that and Shinzao-san rolls his eyes. In true, Izuku can feel Bakugo's rage simmering just behind him. Don't look, don't look, don't look. And Yamato-san still has that frightened look in her eyes, but at least quirks weren't being thrown around, right? It says a lot about Izuku's experiences with Bakugo that was considered one of the best scenarios when the blonde was involved. If that's what you call prickly, I'm terrified to know what you'll consider worse, Shinzao-san mutters to the side, heard by all, but thankfully that seems to be all the other teenager has to say. With that done, Izuku doesn't have an excuse any longer. He turns back to Bakugo, who surprisingly is actually pretty calm. Could it be that Kaken was finally getting anger management skills? Maybe this particular confrontation could even turn out well. Deku, Bakugo starts, still focusing only on Izuku and utterly ignoring his friends behind him. We need to fucking talk. In private. Is that so? Izuku replies, using every bit of willpower he has to force himself to not fidget. Honestly, he is terrified of being left alone with Kaken, considering what prompted Izuku to start avoiding the other teenager in the first place. But if that meant no explosions being thrown around his friends, then alright, just let me say something to my group. A hand places itself on his shoulder. Hold it right there, Midoriya. Izuku could see a vein pop on Bakugo's forehead, but Katsurasen continues speaking, hand still on Izuku's shoulder. I know you've just said that this Kaken, Izuku's throat goes to his mouth as the vein visibly pulses, is an old friend of yours, but honestly I don't see any friendliness going on around here. I can't, in good conscience, leave you alone with him. You little shit, I was trying to be fucking civil for once here and you. Kaken, no. Izuku intersperses himself between Bakugo and his friends, his arms raised protectively over them. At this action, Bakugo freezes mid-attempt of trying to lob a fireball at Katsurasen, not wanting to hurt Izuku. They're just trying to help. And Midoriya Yamato mumbles, hiding behind Izuku's shoulder. With the girl clinging to his waist, he could feel her fear and wish to be anywhere but there. But Izuku manages to send an attempt to comfort her without looking away from his childhood friend. Deku, did you really have to surround yourself with these trash? Bakugo, for once, actually listens and pulls his arm back, and though the blonde is obviously very irritated at how everything is not going the way he wanted, Izuku is amazed by the previously unexhibited levels of restraint Bakugo is showing. Was this the miracle of Yui at work here? Look at how they cling to you. They just aren't worth your time. Offended by Bakugo for the last time, Shinsuke glares at the blonde, and this time Izuku knows that if Bakugo responds to what the other teenager has to say, Bakugo will be eating dirt or worse. Why don't you just leave yourself if that's what you? Izuku has had enough. Everyone, would you all please stop trying to fight and just listen to me? This causes everyone to stare at Izuku in complete and utter shock. Izuku knows why. Before this, he had always sounded nervous, scared, hesitant, or terrified. This time, Izuku shocks himself for actually managing to sound angry. And that doesn't seem to be the end of it, either. Katsurasen, I know you're trying to protect me right now, but please remove your hand from my shoulder as your grip is starting to hurt. Katsurasen does as he is told so fast that Izuku almost stumbles. Were it not for the fact that he is so frustrated right now that he can't be bothered. Understand that I'm trying to really prevent a fight here, and you being overprotective won't help me in that. Thank you for the effort, but right now it is unnecessary. Next, Izuku turns to Bakugo and Shinsuke, both of them with guilt streaking on their faces for a second. Good, Kaken, Shinsuke, please stop trying to provoke each other. It's very clear that you two dislike each other on sight, with Shinsuke hating rude people and Kaken being Kaken. But if that's the case, could you two just ignore each other instead of trying to start a fight? And lastly, Izuku turns to Yamato, who seems to be staring at him in utter astonishment. Sorry about this, Yamato. I know you dislike being put into situations like this, but I ended up bringing this particular situation to our group's doorstep. Will you please forgive me? Yamato closes her mouth. Oh yes, that's good to hear. Now then, with far too much ease, Izuku slips out of the hold she has on him and soon, Izuku has his hand gripping tightly around Bakugo's right wrist. We'll be on our way to have that talk Kaken wanted us to have. I apologize for cutting this group session short, and I'll see you guys later, but for now, bye. Izuku never thought that there would be a day where he would be the one dragging around Bakugo. But apparently, today was that day, as Bakugo can only stare at him while they leave his friends behind, leaving it to Izuku to do all of the job of getting the two of them to a nearby alley. Izuku knows that he'll be having a mental breakdown at some point later that day. But damn, does it feel good to tell other people exactly what he felt for once. Did Kensei starts as all of them stare at the direction Midoriya left with his childhood friend. Did that just really happen? Shinsu can't say he doesn't feel a bit surprised himself. He never thought Midoriya could ever be that forward. One moment, Shinsu was about to use his quirk on Bakugo, and the next he was feeling like he just got reprimanded while Midoriya was already pulling away the blonde out of their sight. I can't believe it myself, Kensei-san, but I think it just did. Still looking a little shocked, Yamato stares at her own hand, which she had been using to hold Midoriya. Midoriya-san. If there was anything Shinsu could easily expect the girl of their group to be, it was quiet. The fact that she is openly reacting like this even with Midoriya gone really says a lot as to how much what just happened earlier has affected Yamato. Kensei snorts, SNRK. Shinsu automatically finds himself glaring at the boy. Now this was a familiar pattern. What is it now, Kensei? I just thought just now, Midoriya just reminded me of you. Shinsu blinks at that statement before realizing what it meant. Blunt, straightforward, and with a tendency to rudely order people around. Only less, well, Shinsu and more angry rabbit face. Blunt, straightforward, and cute then. Very Midoriya, but not Shinsu indeed. Did he really just think of the word cute just now? Especially in regards with Midoriya. Not funny. Shinsu glares at Kensei. The other teenager is a terrible influence on him. Before he joined this group, he would have never thought along those lines. And now he was starting to think Midoriya was cute. And yes, objectively, he could see why people would call him that, but Shinsu never would've. Wait, did Shinsu just do it again? Damn it, Kensei. Oh, but it totally is. Kensei completely ignores his glare with a smirk, before turning to the last member of their team outside of Midoriya. Why Yamato-san? Don't you think that Shinsu could be, a bad influence on Midoriya-san? As he says those words to Yamato, Kensei starts going red, stuttering as he curls to himself before finally just whispering the rest of it. Shinsu, having seen this many times already, takes this opportunity to sneer at the flustered teenager. Now you remember just how close you are to her. Shinsu smirks, shaking his head and raising his hands to face the sky as though telling the world how difficult it was to handle this guy. Can you believe it? And I thought you were pretty unobservant already, Kensei. Hey, shut up. Still flustered, Kensei uncharacteristically raises his voice, vehement and with clenched fists as he replies to Shinsu. There's a reason why I'm like this around G-girls, of which I am still unaware of. Shinsu points out dryly, loving every moment of this victory he has over Kensei. Care to tell us the story? Kensei opens his mouth, closes it, before turning away and crossing his arms with a HMPH. Shinsu savors the resulting silence, knowing that the other teenager wouldn't be forgetting this anytime soon. Should we follow them? Shinsu's eyes go wide once he realizes that the one who just spoke is Yamato. And strangely enough, the girl isn't fidgeting or looking at her feet as she says it. With how the girl normally spoke in single words and refused to even touch them, Shinsu thought the girl to be shy. Now, with her head raised, Shinsu could see a hint of backbone that he had never seen in her before. He asks, "What is it, Yamato-san?" "Follow them, I am mean." There it was, the stutter. Midoriya and Yamato had a lot of similarities regarding their stuttering. But the girl then takes a moment to regain her own bearings before speaking again, this time without any stuttering, though her voice does sound a bit rough, as though unused to speaking in more than a few words at a time. "Midoriya-san and Bakugo-san. Midoriya-san could be in danger. Yamato-san, I believe we should just trust Midoriya-san in this." Kensei is pointedly not looking at Yamato as he says this, his own lack of flustering to show how serious he is about this. He said it before he left, we were being a bit too overprotective. But Midoriya-san probably knows how to handle this by himself already. After all, before he met us, he already knew Kaken since they were kids. Yamato stares at Kensei's back, eyes unreadable, before she nods. "You mean you were being overprotective?" Shinsu feels like he has to add to this. "And don't call him that. It's bad enough to find out that Midoriya-san still uses that kind of childish nickname with that person without you copying him." And just like that, the serious atmosphere around Kensei is gone as he grins at Shinsu again. "And like you weren't actively trying to provoke him yourself earlier. Midoriya sure told you off." Shinsu twitches. He doesn't like how Kensei puts it. He didn't. He just pointed out my own childishness, and I listened to his advice. Yeah, that was right. That was just it. This day onwards, whenever I meet that fellow, I would endeavor to ignore him to the best of my ability as long as he respects me the same effort. See, told you off, got reproached, scolded. Look it up in the dictionary. This time, it is Shinsu who remains quiet. He really doesn't have anything to say to that. And wait, did you call me just Kensei earlier? Without the honorifics? Shinsu blinks as Kensei says that. Shinsu didn't, did he? Does this mean that you're finally opening your heart to us? Hey, maybe I can even beat out Midoriya in befriending you faster. Nope. We are not friends. This is just a cognificial relationship for a class project, and once the week is over, that will be the end of it. The day I admit to be friends with you or Midoriya is the day I take my last breath. Shinsu says this with as much vehemence he can put in the words, which surprisingly is hard to do. Hey, you didn't have to go that far. Kensei laughs. In his efforts to keep his own face straight, Shinsu doesn't notice Yamato leave until she is already well on her way. Izuku doesn't know how to handle this. The moment he manages to get Bakugo the privacy he wants, Izuku just slows down and realizes just what he had just done. How he had just dragged the blonde. How he had repeatedly told him off. And oh gods, how he had also just told off Shinzo-san and Katsura-san for trying to defend him. Forget having a mental breakdown later that day. As it turns out, he might be just having it this moment. Deku, fucking focus on me, you nerd. You're hyperventilating. Izuku blinks as he realizes, yes, Kaken was right. He was hyperventilating. And not only that, hyperventilating in front of Kaken just as they are supposed to have that private talk. Oh god, the blonde was glaring at him now. Fucking calm the heck down, Deku. Izuku feels himself get lifted again by his shirt. How can we talk if you look like you're about to fucking collapse? Right. Kaken really could do better at comforting Izuku, but at least the blonde was trying. Right. That meant he wasn't about to explode his head off actually. Izuku's breathing calms down with a comprehension that pushes away his fears and worries, if only just for a moment. Kaken, since when did you start trying to comfort people? I guess you're fucking alright if you can say stupid things like that. And just like that, Bakugo drops Izuku without much fanfare nor any sign of wanting to answer his question. Now, we can finally talk. Gotten it, you nerd, why did you fucking keep avoiding me for all this time? Now that you're in general education, you start thinking that you're too big for me now, huh? Izuku places his hands on his chest, straightening out his clothes as he tries to stand up. But his thoughts are on a different path entirely. After all, that almost sounds like Kaken, were you worried about me? Shut up, Deku. Was Izuku imagining it? Or was Bakugo looking a little red, not in an angry I'm going to kill you sort of way, but instead as though he was embarrassed? No, Izuku must be imagining things. There was no way that could happen. Not with the Kaken that he knew ever since they were kids. Anyway, enough about that. Bakugo roars, but this time, it's a very familiar kind of roar that Izuku feels like he can handle, not the kind that he is supposed to cower in front of. About the talk you've promised me about in front of your shitty additions. Izuku wants to correct Bakugo for insulting his friends, but knows better than to test the other teenager's patience. Kaken couldn't have gotten that better this quickly, right? Yeah, what about it, Kaken? Throw them away, Deku. You don't need any secondary characters like them. Bakugo's reply is uncompromising in tone. Come and fucking follow me. It'll take a shittin' of time getting you nerd out of the general education department and into the heroic department, but I'm gonna get you fucking out of there as soon as the next sports festival comes along. Izuku can't help it. His jaw falls to the ground, and it is only with the force of will that he manages. Kaken, don't you think that's a bit too much? I mean, I know that, for some reason, you've decided to think that I deserve being your rival since some time ago, but this department is just a waste of your time, Deku. It's my way of preparing to be a hero, Kaken. Izuku knows that convincing Bakugo of anything he doesn't believe in is always a Herculean task. But he has to try. He has to make the other teenager see the situation in his shoes, not in the strange version of reality that Bakugo seems to be currently in. I need to train, and even if I'm trying to hurry, I would still need friends and allies so I can have help. That's what I'm saying. Bakugo swings his fists. And it is truly a miracle that it hasn't come into blows or explosions yet. Before, for just trying to open his mouth, Izuku would have gotten beat up. But still, Bakugo doesn't seem to be convinced, building up frustration inside Izuku again. You don't need to fucking train nor any help. Your quirk is largely weak and useless, but quirks aren't everything, Kaken. They aren't everything. As Izuku interrupts Bakugo, he tries to remain calm and level-headed. But that in itself is a difficult task. After all, if there was anything that constituted as a trigger for Izuku, it will always be his quirk. Even if my quirk is useless, with enough time spent on physical training I just might. Bakugo stares at him in the eyes. Your quirk's not useless. Years before, Izuku would have wept and yelled for the entire world to hear if the teenager in front of him said those words. Years before, he would have been overcome by joy, by relief, by happiness that somebody thought that his quirk could mean something, but not today. Not after All Might. Because even when Toshinori reignited his passion to become a hero, even as he praised Izuku's sharp mind, even he had never ever said those words. It had always been about physical training, about his mind, about making friends, and never about his quirk. Izuku sees red. So you say that, but it is what it is, Kaken? Izuku yells, fists clenched in a way that makes him want to start a fight for once. Everyone keeps saying it's useless. I think it's useless. Even somebody who knows what they are doing called it useless. I have a weak quirk, Kaken. Bakugo roars back, I was there, all right. Izuku halts, rage interrupted by confusion. I was there. When you were telling your fucking sob story to that freaky-ass rake of a man. I was there. Bakugo isn't facing him right now, which is good, because Izuku doesn't think he can meet Kaken in the eyes himself. If Izuku is right in what Bakugo is referring to, then I wasn't intending to, but that park was on my path back home from school. Heck, both our houses are, which was why you were probably crying there of all places. Blah. Izuku should have realized. He should have realized that particular risk. I wasn't intending to, but then I caught what you two were talking about and I had to stay. All right. Bakugo, for the first time in this conversation, explodes. His hands, clenched over the wall in tight fists, make a fireball that lights up the alleyway. But Izuku doesn't even feel the flames, as even the heat feels subdued in this moment. Gotten it. Shitty Deku, the proof was before your own face, before that rake guy's bloody face, and you both didn't even see it. Until then, I didn't see it. Kaken, don't tell me. That's why ever since then you were. Yeah, that's fucking right. I was fucking guilty as fuck. Alright, I was part the fucking issue that made you start thinking like this. Bakugo sounds so torn up, so ashamed as he says those words to Izuku, but then he shakes his head. He faces Izuku, and Izuku can't find himself able to move in front of those intense red eyes. But that's another subject. We're talking about quirks here. About your quirk. It's a testament to how shaking the revelation of the past few seconds is to Izuku that he has honestly forgotten why he got angry in the first place. And now, looking at Bakugo and his expression, Izuku can't muster a single shred of rage, even as the teenager speaks about his quirk. Deku, get it in your head to start giving your quirk a second look. That's the thing you're good at, right? Studying quirks. Bakugo taps a finger on his temple. That guilty look on his face even as the blonde makes a smirk, though this time far from taunting or demeaning as it had used to be. If anything, Izuku thinks of a word, pained. Pained is the only word that only fits his kaken in that moment. Use that little nerd brain of yours to look at it in another angle, because I won't be pointing it out for you. You need to be the one to do this. Otherwise, there will be no fucking point. And once you do figure it out, use that and don't you dare fucking stop from there. It will be terrifying. Fucking damn it, I know just how much it would be once you realize just what kind of devastation a quirk can do in the wrong hands. But don't let that shit stop you, alright? You're going to be the one going against me for the title of number 1. I can't if you be scared of what you can do. Izuku shakes his head, with his hands holding his temples and mind a whirl with just what their conversation has gotten to. It's too much, too quickly. I don't understand what you are trying to say, Kaken. Bakugo Katsuki is stern and unrelenting as he says his last words. You will, fucking Deku. And when you do, then you can finally stop wasting your time in general education and start becoming a hero like me. And just like that, the other teenager absconds, leaving behind Izuku alone in the dark alley. Hash. When Toshinori finds Izuku crying in the middle of the streets, Izuku is treated with the sight of the scarecrow of a man flailing in panic as he gets tackle-hugged by a teenager out of nowhere. It takes Izuku way too long to calm down and finally talk. But when he does, babbling about kaken and quirks and his entire sordid childhood, Toshinori takes the two of them out for ice cream instead of immediately asking what brought the entire thing about. And when Izuku does finally get to explaining the whole confrontation with Bakugo, Toshinori gets this look in his eye, determination, recognition. Did Toshinori know about kaken? Was Toshinori part of the heroic department staff? And soon the man apologizes to Izuku for not making things clear enough for him when he had been training for the past few months. Midoriya-kun. It has taken so much effort from Izuku just to get Toshinori calling him that, instead of young Midoriya or Midoriya boy. That uncomfortably reminds Izuku so much of All Might. I'll be taking steps to settle this with young Bakugo. You'll be finding no more abrupt interruptions in your life from the boy, not unless he fixes up his ways. And as for your quirk, I apologize for unknowingly planting it in your mind that it wouldn't amount to anything. Izuku blinks away tears. But it wouldn't, right? I mean, even All Might said. And as I said, you shouldn't care for what All Might had told you in that afternoon. Toshinori calmly interrupts Izuku. I know the man. He's like any other human. He makes mistakes. If he's here right now, I know that he'll be taking those words back if you'll let him. Izuku nods at that, trying to digest the idea of All Might of all people doing something like that for Izuku. And as for your quirk, I must admit that while I don't possess the mental acuity needed to judge that myself, I've seen other people use quirks that people would normally think as useless in ways that I would never even conceive. Toshinori places his hand over Izuku's hair here. Their respective heights all the more pronounced this way, and I've seen you at work. I know you'll soon understand what Bakugo was trying to imply in that alley, and you'll go even beyond that. Plus ultra, as the school's motto goes. P plus ultra, Izuku repeats, finding the words unfamiliar. I didn't know that this school had that as a motto. Toshinori actually looks surprised. Really, I thought the principal gave a speech for the beginning of the school year, and he likes taking his time explaining plus ultra at any chance he gets. Izuku flushes at this. I may have blanked out and missed the last part of his speech. That would explain it. And don't be ashamed, my boy. Men greater than you have filtered out much our principal's speeches more than you know. Toshinori takes his hand away. And already Izuku misses it. Plus ultra, the belief of going above and beyond the call of duty and putting everything you have in all that you do. That belief fits you, don't you think? Izuku shakes his head at that. No, I couldn't be, not for such a. It fits you, Midoriya-kun. Toshinori says with such belief in him that Izuku can't find it in himself to speak. More than you think. And back to the subject of your quirk. Other people may say minor banishment is a useless quirk, even All Might may have said it. But in the end, it's all about applying what you have with all you've got. And you've got a lot of intellect and determination in spades. Don't yourself bring you down, Midoriya-kun. You'll achieve great things. Just remember your training, apply yourself, and you'll be amazing. Izuku's eyes go wide at that line. Toshinori was not only comforting Izuku. He was telling him to combine Plus Ultra with what Kakin had told him since years before. People called his quirk weak, useless, Deku, but that didn't matter, didn't it? Deku plus Ultra. Was this what I missed from the principal's speech? About a hero being more than just violence, about applying themselves with all they have. Determination lights itself Izuku's features that moment. And he doesn't notice Toshinori smiling in recognition at what passes through his eyes. I'll become that hero. I'll figure out my quirk's place in this world. I'll be Deku, only plus Ultra. For Toshinori, for myself. Izuku nods, and just like that the moment passes. Detecting the same thing, Toshinori then taps at his sundae glass with a sharp grin. Now then, Midoriya-kun, it's time for us to finally enjoy our desserts before they melt. GGGRK. T. Toshinori-san. Don't worry, my boy, as I said, this is normal. My blood's mixing in with the sundae now. It's starting to look like some kind of salty-sweet crime scene at this point. I'll order another one for you. No, two. Just wait here, Toshinori-san. Midoriya-kun, you don't have to. Izuku doesn't know how he deserved knowing Toshinori-san. But maybe if he applies himself enough, plus Ultra, maybe then he would be deserving of knowing the man. Chapter 5. Elaborate. When Izuku starts off their following group assembly with the idea of analyzing their own quirks, the rest of his team are understandably surprised. And while Katsura-san and Yamato-san don't look particularly against the idea, it is Shinsu who raises a hand and questions the necessity of it. After all, what we are to do is to study the quirk of a hero of our choosing. And we have already gone beyond that by choosing 3. Shinsu-san contends, and Izuku keeps quiet at his words. Unless you have a viable reason for us to do so, I'm afraid I have to go against this, Midoriya-san. Izuku's face drops, and immediately Kensei intervenes, with his arms raised. Now, Shinsu-san. The fact is, we're already well underway into finishing our project, with 3 days left on the clock. In fact, if we put in just another day's work, I'm pretty sure we'll be finished, so why not just do a little intellectual exercise to pass the time, don't you think? From how Izuku hears the other boy grunt, Shinsu-san certainly doesn't think so. In fact, the next moment, he stares at Izuku in the eyes, and caught in that gaze Izuku can't help but remember yesterday's events. Your quirk is not useless. Midoriya-chan. Izuku snaps out of his reverie, only to realize that Katsura-san had just called his name. What is it, Katsura-san? As soon as Izuku says those words, he realizes that not only Shinsu-san is staring at him now, indeed, even Katsura-san and Yamato-san are now scrutinizing him with barely hidden concern. And Shinsu-san is still staring at him, this time only more focused. Midoriya-san, do you know how you mutter a lot when you are thinking? At that blunt observation of his bad habit, Izuku can only chuckle self-consciously. Yeah, what about it, Shinsu-san? The thing is, I've been watching you a lot since I've met you personally, Midoriya-san. Shinsu-san states, and Izuku flushes a bit at that. Though he had noticed the odd looks the other teenager had been sending him, he hadn't thought that Shinsu-san would be straightforward enough to admit it without any issue. I've noticed a lot of your habits, and I believe I have a very fair grasp of your personality at this point, which is why I know that though you do mutter a lot most of the times you think, the times that you remain completely quiet are the times that you are truly deep in thought. Izuku gulps. Really? Yes, that seems to be the case. Shinsu-san nods, looking satisfied for a moment before his look is sharp and scrutinizing again. So, if that is indeed the case, where were you for the past few seconds, Midoriya-san? What were you thinking about just now? After all, you aren't someone to start asking something like this for no reason, even with all of your interest in quirks. Izuku holds his gaze for what feels like an eternity, until in the end his shoulder sags in defeat. I was thinking about yesterday, Shinsu-san. He then notices Katsura-san still in his position, his mouth open presumably to butt in on Shinsu-san's interrogation of Izuku, and soon Katsura-san's mouth closes as he turns back to Izuku. His eyes read, don't worry, just say what you feel like you can say. I'll fight off Shinsu with my teeth if he tries to ask more than that. Izuku nods back with a small smile, relieved he has such good friends. Taking a deep breath, he then looks Shinsu-san in the eye. Kakin, well, he told me something about my quirk, about it not being as useless as I had thought it to be, and then I thought earlier, why not ask my teammates for some outside perspective, if I was apparently blind to it like Kakin said, you know. And not that I'm not really interested in finding out more and hopefully help you all out in figuring out more of your own quirks, Izuku is just starting to babble when Yamato-san holds him at the wrist and gives him a reassuring squeeze and a message of it's alright. Shinsu-san raises his brows at this, but he doesn't say anything other than unknowingly affirming what Yamato-san has just told Izuku. He has his hand on his face as he says this. If that's the case then, alright, I'm fine with it now. Shinsu-san then mutters this to himself, probably not for anyone else to hear, but Izuku hears him anyway. It's not that this also isn't beneficial to me. Midoriya has a good eye for quirks, and an outside perspective on brainwashing might help, just as long as Kensei doesn't start using this as fodder for his friendship speeches. And from how Katsurasen yells, it's not just Izuku either. Hey, I heard that. Just like that, the weight on Izuku's shoulders lighten, and ease seeps through his being as a smile slips its way on his face at the familiar brand of banter between Shinsasen and Katsurasen. Noticing the change in the mood, the latter teenager of the particular duo waves his arms. Katsurasen has a grin on his face as he approaches Izuku. As he does, Izuku notices that Yamato-san has let him go before taking a step back, presumably knowing her own effect on the teenager. Midori-san, I can't believe I forgot to ask this before, but what is your quirk? For a second, Izuku wrings his hands. My quirk is minor banishment. It lets me banish only up to 10 grams of things that I touch, and I get headaches by the time I have removed around 3 kilograms worth of mass. It's pretty useless. Shinsasen interrupts Izuku before he can finish. Don't call it useless just yet, Midori-san. We still haven't studied any of its particulars, and who knows, maybe we can find an odd use for it. Izuku nods quietly at that, remembering his own use of it as a stain cleanser. Creative, yes, as Toshinori had put it, but it was far from something a hero could use. But nobody in this group, not even Katsurasen, knew of Izuku's goal of becoming a hero just yet. While they all knew Izuku was pretty obsessed with heroes, Izuku knew they thought that it was all just being a fan. I guess it's my turn now, huh? Katsurasen starts, and the rest of the team turn to him in curiosity. Midori-chan already knows this, but my quirk's name is Scan. It let me knows the structure of things that I touch with these things in my hands. The teenager runs his fingers over the square panels on his palms. It's a bit uncontrollable for me, so whenever I touch something with my hands I get barraged with a lot of information. That information, as you have figured it out by now, is what has led me to knowing about building things, as my head has more blueprints than a workshop. Is that why you knew about muscle strain when I first met you? Shinsasen asks, and Katsurasen nods. The purple-haired teenager nods at Izuku's direction. I figured that with Midoriya here, you would be very familiar with the physical structure of muscle strain. Speaking of Midoriya, Izuku nods back wildly. Yeah, Katsurasen always knows when I have trained a bit too much. Even Toshinori, my trainer, tells me that I'm lucky to know him, as it's really difficult to really judge that unless you know what you're doing. And that's just the tip of the iceberg for Katsurasen's Scan. Besides mechanical, industrial, engineering, and medical uses, the thing we have figured out about his. At the babbling, Shinsasen stares at Izuku with wide eyes, and Katsurasen laughs before coming close to Izuku and ruffling his hair again. Izuku, with his babbling interrupted by the action, feels like a wet kitten. Midori-chan, let me do my own bragging. Katsurasen teases, causing Izuku to blush. Surely, he hadn't been that excited, right? Anyways, about that last part. This Katsurasen wraps his arm around Izuku's shoulder. Cuddly Miracle over here soon figured out after we met that maybe I could use my quirk to do more than act as a glorified X-ray scanner of things. You know, he asked me if I could use my quirk to, effectively, look at an object's recent history. And as it turns out I can. Psychometry, Yamato-san whispers. I can see how that can be very useful in both mechanics and medicine. Knowing the history of the subject would be crucial to making correct diagnoses, but that's not at all. Shinsasen nods at Izuku. You were about to speak of its uses in detective work, weren't you? An odd look flashes itself at Katsurasen's face at that question, too fast for Izuku to identify what it was. But Izuku nods back, taking the moment to get himself free. Yeah, if Katsurasen were to become a detective, just by touching a crime scene he could get a first-hand idea of what happened there. And it'll also help him find crucial evidence. Too bad it's a little inaccurate at this point. Katsurasen speaks again, though this time sounding somber. As it's still something new to me, I still don't have much control over what I can find out. Not that I had much control over my quirk's activation in the first place. Shinsasen gives the other teenager an odd look, before clearly coming to a decision to just ask him later. He then turns to the rest of the team. Evidently, it appears to be that Midoriya has already figured out something new about it, and Kensei is still working on what he has. Kensei, do you think we need to focus on your quirk today? All he gets is a grin and a shake. Nah, I'm fine with focusing on you guys. It's more about practice than discovery for me at this point. Shinsasen closes his eyes for a moment, before he exchanges looks with the only girl of their team. Yamato-san, do you want to go first, or? The reticent girl in question shakes for a bit, and Izuku nearly moves to her side, but then a decisive gleam blooms in her eyes and Yamato-san nods. Why yes, she turns to Izuku, and he knows what she wants immediately. Midoriya-san, see can you? Izuku isn't blind. He knows that Yamato-san doesn't talk very much whenever the rest of the team is around. And though the girl could be very eloquent in their occasional mental chats, even to Izuku it is evident that that same eloquence leaves her whenever she has to actually talk. Izuku was similar to her that way, which was probably why they got along so well. And with the only other way of making herself understood having to do with opening her mind to others, of course Yamato-san couldn't really converse with anyone but Izuku. Not everyone was welcome to telepathy, and Yamato-san told so herself that she didn't like using it very much either outside of trusted individuals, so Izuku has to be the one to speak for her. It's his duty as her friend to help her be understood and open up to others. Izuku nods, and soon she sighs in relief. Turning to the rest of the team, he starts. Yamato-san's quirk is touch-based telepathy. It lets her connect superficially to the minds of other people via touch, and like Katsura-san, she can't really control it. The other two males think about that, and immediately, Shinzo-san winces. I can see now why you have difficulties talking to strangers, especially males, Yamato-san. I apologize if I had offended you in the past in any way. Katsura-san, on the other hand, is very quiet, and Izuku supposes it is related as to why the other teenager doesn't talk to girls very much either. How did Midoriya-san meet you, if that was the case? Shinzo-san asks Yamato-san, and she actually responds, a small smile to be found on her lips. I bumped into him. Katsura-san snorts, and though the other teenager is still not looking at the rest of them, Izuku can see that the solemnity has passed now. Shinzo-san is also smiling, and as blinding as the rare expression is to Izuku, he can't understand why they are suddenly so cheerful. I can see how that could have led to you getting to know each other. Izuku also feels happy though, to see the rest of his team interacting a lot more, as well as the evident new sort of understanding between Shinzo-san and Yamato-san. But then, the moment passes, and recognizing it, he turns to Yamato-san. Yamato-san, do you think you can practice with the rest of our team with your quirk? I know it can be useful sometimes, being capable of delivering things that can't be put into words. You know you're bad at trying your quirk with anyone else other than me, but you can trust Shinzo-san and Katsura-san? Alright. Yamato-san, in response, looks at Shinzo-san, and as though her quirk has suddenly lost its limiter, it is Shinzo-san who replies, yes, we'll be practicing it soon when we have time. Kensei-san, how about you? Do you think you can work with Yamato-san with this? Katsura-san's face is red, and Izuku can see that he has to force his own words out, but soon the other teenager manages, of course, who do you think you're talking to? Let's work Titoger later, Yamato-san. She nods, whispering, thank you. Her eyes take on a watery sheen, and soon Izuku himself has to wipe away a tear. Hash. Shinsu Hitoshi is no fool. Kensei had warned him, after all, that this would happen. The day before, after that odd moment of trying to reach into the vehemence he normally had in spades and finding himself lacking, he had realized that the other teenager turned out to be right. He is starting to care for this odd bunch of misfits that he calls his team. After all, what else could he call a group of people that he could just talk to and expect no jeers nor taunts coming along his way? Midoriya is one thing, but Kensei is another, and now Yamato is included to that list. Respect for Midoriya comes along easily. After all, despite Shinsu's initial efforts to be as unapproachable and stony as possible, believing the rest of his general education class to be just a bunch of dunderheads that would only remind him of how much he wants to be in the hero department, the green-haired boy had decided to try and attempt to befriend him. And why? Nobody deserves to be alone, Shinzo-san. Such a pure and well-intentioned ideal, normally that of platitudes and well-wishes that actually don't go anywhere. But Midoriya actually does try to approach Shinsu. And Shinsu actually does see just how earnest the other teenager is, so that, in the end, made Shinsu give the other teenager a chance, even as he said that they wouldn't become friends. Then that respect only swells at Midoriya's obvious intellect and sheer will to reach his goals, whatever those goals may be. Knowing Midoriya, though, it would be something blindly altruistic again that would make Kensei work hard to protect the boy in turn. Which brings Shinsu to Kensei. Kensei was a breath of fresh air, to be honest. Despite that rocky initial start, Shinsu does find himself agreeing with Kensei's conclusion that they were very similar people, but unlike Shinsu, Kensei was someone willing to start easy conversation, and Shinsu always found himself talking back, if only to snark at the other teenager. Kensei's technical skills and outright declaration of protection also appealed to Shinsu, but like Midoriya, that only comes secondary to the fact that like Midoriya, Shinsu knows that Kensei wouldn't talk badly of him like most people would once they knew of his quirk. It was just not their personality to be like that. Yamato, Shinsu doesn't know much about her just yet, but he knows that this moment is crucial. This moment is when he can finally start trusting other people, despite the deep-seated bitterness he knows exists inside him that prevents him from trying to make friends. Would he talk to them about his quirk, or not? The answer is easy. My quirk is called brainwashing. Midoriya and Kensei would know its effects by now, Kensei as well as the name, and it lets me temporarily take control of others that verbally respond to me. The control is tenuous, easily overcome by a slight nudge to those affected as well as possible to be fought off by the sheer force of will, but other than that its effects are absolute. The other teens look at him. Everyone but Kensei wiping away moisture from their eyes, the result of the previous talk about Yamato's quirk. I have received many comments about it being a very evil quirk. And to be honest, Shinsu has to look them in the eyes now, determination filling up his chest. I am resolute to prove to the rest of the world wrong. I will become a hero, no matter what. Midoriya has an understanding smile on his face. His eyes are now clear of any moisture, and he has his hands in tight fists. Right, Shinsao-san. My goal is the same thing, to become part of the heroic department so I can become a hero like All Might. But for that to happen, no, not now. We have to talk about this later, Midoriya. Midoriya nods, still smiling at him. And despite the sudden coil of emotions in his gut, Shinsu can't help but return the expression. It wasn't the other teenager's fault that his dream and Midoriya's would clash. Not when there could only be one victor in the school festival tournament. Shinsu would have to settle it at some point with the other teenager, but not now. Not while the rest of the team is still looking at Shinsu with acceptance. Though Shinsu could do with much less of Kensei's sudden inputs. Hey, Hitoshi. Haven't you been dropping your honorifics for some time now? First it was me. Next it was with Izuku-chan. Midoriya yelps, turning at Kensei. Shinsu can only say that the other teenager was feeling much the same thing as Shinsu was at that moment. Izuku-chan. Hitoshi, come on, guys. Kensei grins at them, actually swooping in to put his arms around Shinsu and Midoriya's shoulders. At Midoriya's awkwardness and Shinsu's indignation at the manhandling, Yamato actually giggles, the traitor. We've just had our first group heart-to-heart. We should be dropping honorifics and starting with the first names by now. I know Shinsu here has already. Shut up, Shinsu starts, before sighing as the other teenager grins at him, as if daring him to disprove him. Kensei, see, the other teenager is overly gleeful at being called so familiarly, and soon Kensei is pouncing on Midoriya's head with requests. Come on, Izuku-chan, or even Izuku if you just want me to, just call me Kensei, alright. Why you too, Yamato? The girl nods at that request, a smile on her face. Kensei-san, Hitoshi-san. The question is posed to him, so Shinsu no, Hitoshi nods, though not before elbowing Kensei in the ribs and pulling away when the teenager yelps. Yes, that would do. And as for you, Kensei, I know I'm not going to be able to stop you from calling me by my first name, but at least add on an honorific. You too, Midoriya. I see can't. Midoriya yelps, face going red. That will be rude of me. Yeah, it wouldn't be fair if Hitoshi kept on calling Izuku by his last name and he still got to be referred by his first name. No, that's not the point. Midoriya actually yells at Kensei. And Hitoshi has to chuckle at the scolded look that manages its way on the other teenager's face. I don't think I can deserve to call you guys so informally, it'll be rude. Just think of it this way, Midoriya. Hitoshi gives his 2 cents. I don't mind if you still kept on calling me by my last name. And I don't know about Yamato, but you've known Kensei longer than the two of us and you still refuse to call him by his first name despite his wishes. Wouldn't that be ruder than actually calling him by his first name? Midoriya stops and visibly thinks about that, and soon he murmurs to Kensei, all right, Kensei-san, but only because you asked me to. Kensei, the idiot, actually whoops at that, going from scolded puppy to exuberant teenager in so little time that Hitoshi almost thinks he had just imagined the scolded Kensei. Finally, with a bright red face, Midoriya turns back to Hitoshi and Yamato. Didio, you want me to? If you don't feel like it just yet, I don't mind. Hitoshi raises his hand. And judging by Yamato's nod, the girl feels the same. Just as long as you let me call you Midoriya and drop the honorific in return. Midoriya takes a deep breath, and then, Shinsu. Why Yamato? With that done, Hitoshi nods. And he turns to redirecting the conversation back to where it had been earlier before Kensei derailed it with his name-related tangents. Midoriya, do you have anything for me and my quirk? Any idea as to how I might become better? It was obvious from earlier that the teenager had something in mind for him, and just like that, the change is instant in Midoriya. All evidence of flushing leaves the other teenager's face, and soon a look of confidence seeps into his expression. Shinsu. Midoriya stumbles a bit with his words for a moment over the name change, but the green-headed teenager pushes on. At this point, Hitoshi could really see why Kensei was so passionate in defending the person before him. You said earlier that your quirk could be activated as long as you had a verbal response. Did you test if that was not the entire case? Hitoshi feels confused. How else could someone else respond? Instead of putting it in words, Midoriya puts it into action. He stretches out his arm in front of Hitoshi, his hand open as if offering a handshake, and suddenly it clicks in Hitoshi's head. Nice, Izuku. Kensei cheers on, also seeing where Midoriya was going. People don't only respond to people just by speaking. We also have this thing called body language and gesturing. If Hitoshi can activate his quirk using something like a handshake, then it'll be much easier for him to use, and will make it all the more villainous, considering it means taking advantage of people's good manners. Hitoshi adds in his head, but then he shakes the thought away. Midoriya has put his arm down now, but Hitoshi knows what the other teenager is asking him to do without even speaking. Hitoshi reaches out his hand for a handshake, and the next moment, Midoriya takes his hand and gives it a shake. Normally, to Hitoshi, activating his quirk is like reaching out towards the night sky and throwing a huge, if weak, net to reel in the brightest of stars, as though he is a fisherman reeling in fish to set free later, only instead of the deep blue ocean his fishing grounds were the infinitely dark skies. In that vision, the moment Midoriya takes his hand, the star before him shines just a bit more, just a little brighter. It makes Hitoshi want it, but part of Hitoshi doesn't want to cast his net. This star feels like it was where it belonged, no matter how much Hitoshi wants to get it, free to glow bright in the dark sky, but unlike so many other times, he has been given permission. He throws his net, and fails to reel back the twinkling star that is Midoriya. It didn't work. Hitoshi hears Kensei whisper to no one in particular, and Hitoshi opens his eyes. When did they close? To see an odd smile on Midoriya's face. Or did it? It didn't work. Yes, it didn't work, but I felt it, Midoriya says, and Hitoshi feels relief, feels more hope for the future success of his dream of becoming a certified hero. It didn't overtake me, couldn't even if I wanted it to, but it was there. It was possible. I just need to get better. Hitoshi whispers to himself, feeling a new path opening before his eyes. Nobody asked me to try this before, but now that I'm aware of it, I know that I just need to get better. Midoriya smiles, and I know you will, Shinsu. And just like that, Hitoshi knows 3 things. 1, he definitely now has friends, at least with Midoriya. 2, he has a lot of work in the future. And 3, he has to return this favor to Midoriya in future, as well as the rest of this team for letting this very situation come to be. Because Hitoshi knows that without them, he would have some very bitter and desperate months ahead of him instead of the bright future that it looks to be right now. When Toshinori arrives to his and young Midoriya's meeting place for their next training session, 2 days later, he is filled with surprise. After all, while at this point Toshinori has gotten used to his protege arriving really early, even earlier than the already unholy 4 a.m. Toshinori has scheduled with the teenager just so the teenager could head to his classes afterwards. He doesn't have one early teenager in the park that they normally use. He has 4 inhumanly early teenagers in the park that they normally use. Toshinori-san. Izuku's eyes are bright. These are my friends, Shinsu, Yamato, and Kensei-san. They were hoping to see if you could help them train up just like you did with me. Toshinori knows he should have told the boy to keep their training secret. He knew this could happen. But he had forgotten to, and it had happened anyway. What would happen now? Once Toshinori has to reveal his identity as All Might and he has to pass on one for all once and for all. But he can't say no to that face. Not when it's not only Izuku who is looking at him with hope, but also the 3 other teenagers who came along with him. Toshinori was never good at refusing others' help. It was literally his job as the symbol of peace. Toshinori coughs out blood, and amidst the shocked looks he gets from everyone but his protege, he mutters, "All right." It is once that Toshinori has managed to calm down the teenagers and has gotten properly introduced that he recognizes the purple-haired teenager that he has doing push-ups with Izuku and young Katsura on the park floor. It is none other than Shinsu Hitoshi. Without that look of outright desperation and bitterness and instead a soft smile on his face, Toshinori didn't recognize the teenager. The other 2, Toshinori doesn't know very well, but outside of the odd look he receives from the Katsura boy once Toshinori gives him a handshake, it doesn't appear to him like they will be problems. In fact, they, as well as young Shinsu, seem to be good influences on his protege. And it didn't take much to see that they were very tightly knit for what was supposed to be a group merely created for a class project. And why did that particular class project sound familiar? Toshinori tries to think where he could have heard about it, but then he shakes his head. Oh well, Toshinori will need to handle the matter of one for all later, but this wasn't bad, he supposes. After all, his protege would need all the help and support he could get to become the next symbol of peace. If, and only if, the other teenagers could prove themselves worthy of being trusted. Then would Toshinori decide to also let them in on the secret. When the training session finally ends, it is Izuku that leaves last. The other teenagers, this being their first time training with Toshinori and thus not having the stamina yet to go through all the exercises, left earlier and so Toshinori has only Izuku for company once again. Was this alright? His protege asks. I know this kind of came out of the blue. Toshinori sighs. But in the end, he pats the teenager's hair. It was, but it's alright by now. I'm surprised, though, that you would be willing to share this with them. I know that you still haven't told your mother about your training sessions. Izuku blushes in that endearing way of his. Mom still thinks that I've decided to stop trying to be a hero. At first, it was unintentional. with me suddenly getting quieter about it once I've met you, Toshinori-san, and her misunderstanding it to be like that. But after realizing how less worried she gets now, I've decided to not tell her that I haven't given up yet. He looks down. At least, not until I'm part of the heroic department. Toshinori brushes the teenager's hair in an attempt to comfort. He then points out, you know she would be supportive if she knows. From what you've told me of Inkasan, she is that kind of mother. Not that Toshinori would know of mothers. Yeah, I know. Izuku nods, a smile on his face again, and Toshinori pulls away. Toshinori-san. Toshinori tilts his head. Yeah, what is it, Midoriya-kun? Part of the reason why I decided to invite them was that it is also Shinsu's dream to become a hero in the future. Like me, he needs training. That would make sense. His student was the kind of boy who would offer his heart if anybody asked. And the other reason is the other day, we had a little group exercise about learning each other's quirks. They tried to help me with mine, and Kensei-san devised several tests for me to do. While I still haven't figured out what to do, what we've found outside of a few tricks here and there, I thought it would only be right to do this in return. Toshinori's interest is piqued. What did they find? Do you have your observations written down? Oh, who am I kidding? Of course you do. Izuku is grinning at him, his hero notebook offered already in hand and for Toshinori to read. Toshinori takes the notebook with an eye roll, and shaking his head a bit at the admittedly obsessive notes taken regarding his coworkers, Toshinori flips through the notebook until he finds the relevant page. What is written is as follows. My quirk, minor banishment. Observations. While I already know that I can only banish up to 10 grams at a time, Shinsu suggested me to test how quickly I could banish more than that. For example, according to Kensei-san, the rock we tested my quirk with was exactly 55 grams. How awesome is it that he could things like that? Before I took 10 grams out of it, that left 45 grams, so presumably by doing it 5 more times I could banish the entire rock. How fast could I banish things without having to rest? According to our tests, the mass I banish is directly proportional with how long it will take for me to activate my quirk again. Right now, it takes me 2 seconds to reactivate my quirk at critical mass 10 grams. But by banishing 1 gram instead, I could banish again in much less time. Could it be that with practice I could reduce those 2 seconds? Or should I focus on banishing less mass more frequently? I got a headache by the time we banished around 3 kilograms worth of random rocks though. Should test it at some point if that number changes with different materials. Shinsu just clipped me over the head for being reckless and trying to get myself hurt. From what I've told the others of my trick of banishing stains away from clothes, we've figured out that I could selectively choose what I could banish, and then I don't need to directly touch it with my skin either. This means that my quirk can be conducted across things I touch, allowing me to banish things that are touching what it is that I am already touching, and B, I can choose which parts of things that I can banish. This needs testing. With a pot that Kensei-san found for us, I've managed to test my theory, and we've found out that my quirk can be conducted through objects like soil. Not only that, with my new initials printed across the bottom of the pot, I've proven that I can etch objects by banishing bit by bit until what is left is a little series of dents that make letters. Where did Kensei-san find this pot though? On second thought, I shouldn't have asked. On that note, I immediately rubbed out my initials from the bottom of the pot and asked Yamato to help me return it to the window it had originally belonged. I know that soil is actually made out of a lot of really small particles just clumped up together. So what is it that determines object that I am touching? And does solidity and compactness matter in the conduction of my quirk? Note to self, test this later at home with a glass of water. We've did more tests, and Yamato gave her own suggestion of me testing the range of which I could conduct my quirk through objects. As it turns out, with a stick we found, it's as far as 10 meters, though I can't conduct through a second object to a third object and so forth. Only what is touching me secondhand. No matter how big the initial object seems to be, I can banish anywhere on it though. As long as I am aware where I am banishing it in relation to me, I can, though if I can't judge something like that, am dizzy because of Kensei-san spinning me around like a stuffed toy, then I can't banish even if I know that part exists. Spatial awareness is another limitation of my quirk, I find. I put what I found quickly to work though. Shinsu convinced me too. Katsurasan will never know why his shoelaces suddenly broke apart while he was walking. Reading the page, as well as the odd scribbles made here and there by his student, Toshinori can't help but smile. From how Izuku has written his notes, there certainly seem to be a lot of stories behind them, and the intellect of all 4 teenagers is obvious. The following pages are the specifics, filled with tables and graphs. So Toshinori lifts his head to look at Izuku with the same smile. The teenager is blushing and looking at his own feet, probably only remembering by now exactly what he had written in the notebook he had given Toshinori. Toshinori starts, so. An odd wail comes from the teenager in front of him, and Toshinori has to grin. But enough teasing. Admittedly, there was one curious point from what Toshinori had read. So, how did you do it? Izuku fiddles with his fingers as Toshinori returns him his notebook. DDO what? Broke young Katsura's shoelaces. Izuku wails again in embarrassment, and Toshinori laughs. But then, Izuku calms down, and Toshinori waits until he responds, I Shinsu suggested it, told me to take revenge for Kensei-san swinging me around like that. So I touched the ground with my hands, watched Katsura-san and waited for his shoelaces to touch the ground beneath his feet, and Izuku makes a popping sound. Just like that, I banished just a bit around the middle of one of his shoelaces, causing him to trip as his feet slipped. Honestly, I didn't think it would work until I actually did it. Shinsu looked pretty impressed with me too. From how the teenager looks, he hadn't realized what he has done, but Toshinori can. Closing his eyes, he gives young Bakugo a little praise with his mind. Just a bit, not too much. The boy was still pretty horrible in interacting with others, not just with young Izuku, and then speaks. You do realize that was the first step for your path in applying your quirk and becoming a hero, right? Izuku blinks. Excuse me. Looks like when it came to his own quirk. Though creative he may be at times, his protege really was blind. Tell me, imagine this situation. You are watching a civilian being chased by a villain on foot. You are less than 10 meters away at the moment, but the heroes are much farther. What do you think would happen if you did the same thing you did with young Katsura then? They would trip. His student automatically answers, before he actually considers what he has just said. They would trip. It's not big, but in the grand scheme of things, something as small as a trip in the right time can mean a victory for the heroes. Toshinori finishes. Remember, Midoriya-kun, for the want of a nail, a war can be lost. And I'm pretty sure your tricks aren't limited to just that. Even with what I have just read, I can't figure out much, but you will figure out more, that I'm sure of. Izuku has that contemplative gleam in his eyes again. And Toshinori feels proud of his student when he nods in what Toshinori knows to be a decision to think more on what he has found out. But all things have to end. Now, don't you have classes to go to? With a yelp, his protege jumps, and soon Izuku is running off, screaming, I'm going to be late. Goodbye, Toshinori. And Toshinori laughs as he sees him go, not even caring as blood spurts out of his face as he does so. And when the boy is gone, so is Toshinori, leaving All Might in his place. With a cheery whistle, All Might hums to himself. Then a memory comes to mind, of a recent meeting with a certain space-themed hero. Haha. He laughs, if only to himself. I can't believe I've forgotten. Didn't 13 tell me earlier that they were planning to let a small group of their students watch our field trip down in USJ in 10 days? Something about letting only the best of their class get the opportunity to watch the next generation of heroes. In that moment, as he heads to his own class to teach, Toshinori hopes that Izuku and his team manage to get that particular bit of opportunity. After all Might has to finally deliver his apology in person, instead of hiding behind Toshinori. Chapter 6. Broken. Izuku can't believe it. Finally, it was the end of the week, and 13 Sensei had them present their group projects. And not only did they manage to impress 13 and nab the top spot in the class for what they had made, 13 Sensei also revealed that they had a reward for those who managed to make the best presentation. That is, them. The reward: to get a chance to watch 13 Sensei and several other heroes at work down at Unforeseen Simulation Joint while they were teaching Class 1 a lesson in handling disaster situation. Izuku just can't wait. Whoa, Izuku, you're practically vibrating. Kensei-san laughs beside him, but Izuku is far too excited to be mortified now. Hey man, it's still more than a week before we get there. At this rate, by the time Sensei brings us there, you'll have burnt yourself right out. And that will be terribly unfortunate, because I was hoping that you would all deliver this same report there as you had for me. Izuku and the rest of his team turn as one towards the speaker, who is none other than 13 himself. The teacher had been just telling them exactly what they were rewarded with when Izuku started getting pumped up, and this time, the mortification does set in. Izuku turns red at the realization that he had just forgotten their teacher was still there. Yamato giggles behind Izuku, and Izuku goes only more crimson. Thankfully, Shinsu takes the lead this time. You want us to show our project to Class 1 as well, 13 Sensei? The space-themed hero nods. You can think of it as something in return for the chance that they'll be giving you to study their quirks firsthand. After all, while you four have earned the right to learn the same lessons we will be teaching them, you can't say the same about seeing their quirks, right? After all, 13 Sensei trails off, giving unsubtle glances on both Izuku and Shinsu's way. I am well aware that there are some of you here that are aiming to win in this coming sports festival. Izuku freezes, and before he knows it, he has already spoken. You're giving us an advantage. The atmosphere changes at that. The truth was, the subject of shifting from the general education department to the heroic department was something that was always discussed in the down low. Taboo. After all, while it was a commonly accepted idea that those who fail to get to the heroic department will be part of the general education program, cases wherein a student moved up to the heroic department was few and far in between. People rarely heard of such success stories, and those stories were far outnumbered by the stories of those who had their dreams crushed and never had the chance to take that first step in becoming a hero before graduating. So it was commonly accepted that this was to be, if you were part of the general education department and wished you weren't. You keep quiet about it. Part of the reason Shinsu had been so isolated was this very fact. Izuku thinks as he turns to the teenager in question. 13 Sensei nods. This is not, and will never be, the first time I have taught students that wanted to leave my class. One could even say that to these students, 1 degree Celsius is a mere stepping stone, as your class had been made with the thought in mind for the ones that have the best talents in the department. Not only Izuku's eyes go wide at that admission. Some looks are exchanged, and soon, Kensei-sen speaks, but Sensei, wouldn't that mean that this class project was a preliminary test to see who had the best aptitude for moving up to the heroic department? 13 Sensei asks rhetorically, and Izuku's teammate closes his mouth. Think of it, we haven't even been 1 month into your time here, and I have already given you all a project like what you had just done. In another school, it'll take longer before that would happen. To make the report, we needed to have teamwork and analytical skills regarding quirks. Izuku mumbles, already thinking about what he had just found out. But that wouldn't be enough, wouldn't it? Most students already have those in varying degrees, and the others have passed their own projects, so that wouldn't be all. The only difference between us and the rest of them was that we came through and exceeded what was asked of us to do. Yamato whispers, finishing what Izuku was about to say. She turns to their teacher, plus Ultra. Izuku gets the idea that their sensei is smiling beneath the spacesuit. Indeed, plus Ultra, as the principal likes to say. Yamato blushes as she turns to hide behind Shinsu. At that, 13 Sensei takes a step back, crossing their arms behind themselves. This is not an opportunity that just anyone can have. After all, USJ is in a way my pride and joy beyond my own students, one of the things I hope will exist even after my time as a teacher. Beyond the information goldmine I am practically handing over to you, it is the place where I teach to the next generation again and again the lessons of using their quirks for the benefit of all. Izuku can feel part of himself fanboying again as their teacher continues their speech. So I only give it to the best of the best every year, between all of the classes I teach. If nobody qualifies, nobody gets the chance for that year. But now, you 4 have. And unlike last time, you all will get to see Class 1A in action as opposed to 1B. Use it well. Izuku nods, a grin forming on his face. And when he turns to Kensei-san and Yamato, they meet him with supportive looks and a thumbs up. But when Izuku looks at Shinsu, the other teenager refuses to meet his eyes. This was a great opportunity. Classes 1A and 1B were the main competition against gaining the much-coveted chance to move up departments, and everyone knew it. Just by getting to scope out half of that competition was a victory in itself in the information battle. So why is Shinsu refusing to meet Izuku in the eyes now of all times? Yamato, Kensei, can you two leave Midoriya and I alone for a while? We have to talk. They are walking on the way to the general education dormitories when Hitoshi speaks up to the rest of the group. Kensei gives Hitoshi a suspicious look, as though he is planning something bad for Izuku. But at this point Hitoshi only shakes his head exasperatedly at the allegation as opposed to being offended. After all, he knows that Kensei really didn't think badly of him, just a tad overprotective over Midoriya. That was all. In comparison, Yamato gives him an empathetic gaze, instantly understanding what Hitoshi is about to do. And in that moment Hitoshi understands that not only was the girl a telepathic, she was also good at reading people without even needing to touch them. It was to be expected, considering how much first-hand experience Yamato must have had dealing with other people's thoughts. The girl gives Kensei a tug on his sleeve, and Kensei immediately goes red once he realizes just who has gotten close to him. With a half-babbled line of goodbye, Izuku and Shinsu, be nice to Izuku-chan. To Shinsu, the gray-haired teenager runs off, leaving them behind with blinking and a trail of dust. It's a surprisingly manipulative action by their quietest member to help Hitoshi. And really, at some point, Shinsu should get that story out of Kensei as to why he was so horrible around girls. At first, he had thought Kensei just had a crush on their quiet teammate. But that theory was thrown out the window when Shinsu saw Kensei doing the same thing with a random girl that bumped into them while they were chatting in the middle of the street. Delicate pair of hands clasp his and Midoriya's respective right and left hands together, and Hitoshi turns to see Yamato smiling, her face close to their intertwined hands. Let's meet again tomorrow, in the usual place we train in, all right. Before he can say anything in response, she also leaves. Hitoshi blinks as he watches Yamato go. That girl is wilier than what I had expected of her since we first met. Don't you think so, Midoriya? He turns to the only person left beside him, only to jump a bit in surprise once he finds the other boy, muttering loudly to himself with a very odd expression on his face about girls, touching hands, and a general line of Hitoshi can't help it. He snorts. Midoriya, snap out of it. I know she has to touch people to use her quirk. But does she really have to take my hand? But no, I mustn't forget, she also took Shinsu's. It's really nice that she can trust people other than me now, but Midoriya mumbles, still deep in his thought process, before Hitoshi's words finally get to him, causing him to jerk up wildly. Shinsu. Sorry if you had heard that. Don't worry, I don't mind. In fact, I found it a little funny. Hitoshi actually smiles when the other teenager wails in mortification. Now, Midoriya. The others have finally given us the privacy I wanted. We should talk. As though a switch has been flipped, Midoriya snaps his head to face him. Shinsu, is this about how you refused to look at me when 13-sensei told us about our incoming trip down at the USJ? So Midoriya had noticed. To be honest, Hitoshi should have expected that of the usually observant and very insightful teenager. Yes, and also about the upcoming sports festival? Hitoshi nods, and for a moment, he stays silent. He has to say this, or he knows that it'll fester in him, and Midoriya doesn't deserve that of Hitoshi. Midoriya, have you ever thought of what it would mean if we had the same goals? Midoriya blinks at his question. Hitoshi honestly doesn't know if the other teenager is really surprised or is just faking it. No, not really. I mean, wouldn't it be nice if we became heroes together, right? It would be better if Kensei-san and Yamato would also join us, so we could work together in the future. But I've talked to Yamato-san and she said she wanted to be a therapist, and I have no idea what Kensei-san is planning for the future. That's exactly the thing, Midoriya. Hitoshi cuts in, because he knows the other teenager can go on and on without being interrupted. We can't become heroes together. Remember, there will be only one winner in the sports festival, and only that winner can be part of the heroic department. If I win, you won't. If you win, I won't. It's a natural conflict of interests. Understand this, please. Hitoshi never thought before what it would mean if he had a friend like him in general education, if he knew someone with the same aspirations and goals as him, because he never had friends before, because he had thought himself beyond those, because general education had always been just a stepping stone for the heroic course, as 13 had put it. But now he has friends. Now that he knows someone who will be his enemy in the future, it's suddenly different. Shinsu, I know that you are also in a hurry to get into the heroic department. Midoriya flinches at his accusation, and Hitoshi closes his eyes, taking that as confirmation. After all, the longer we spend in the general education, the more we would get left behind by our future peers when we finally become part of them. Not if. It would never be if. Because if Hitoshi had it his way, even if he had left the general education and joined the heroic department, he would be helping Midoriya become a hero just like he knew the other teenager would for him. So never if. Because by hook or by crook, Midoriya would become a hero just like Hitoshi would. But this year, no, it will be between the two of them. Not both. But you keep on helping me, even then. Hitoshi continues as Midoriya remains quiet. You taught me a new way I could use my quirk with. You've even introduced me to your personal teacher. So Midoriya, I ask you this, do you know what it means for us to have the same goal? For a while, everything around them is silent. It's as though the world itself is waiting for them to resume, quiet in Hitoshi's ears. And then the moment passes as Midoriya finally speaks again. Yeah, he looks up, meeting Hitoshi in the eyes with the most serious expression he has ever seen on the other teenager. I do. Hitoshi keeps quiet this time, as Midoriya starts speaking. I know I said earlier that it didn't occur to me, but it did, you know. In fact, before Kensei-san and I approached you for our group project, it came to me. Toshinori-san was the one who suggested the idea of starting off in the general department. Because of him, I didn't even have to take the entrance exams to get into UA. Hitoshi's eyes widened just a bit at that particular revelation, because that suggested a lot as to just how influential the skeleton of a man that was now teaching them all how to fight. It would have been different if I wanted to enter the heroic department first, but if it was just the general department, he could wave the test off with his testimony. He said, but when I finally got into our current department, as I watched the people come in on the second day, I realized it was not just me who wanted to be a hero. Midoriya actually turns away from him, looking at the sky. I knew it intellectually, but seeing it firsthand was different, you know. Before, I only knew Kaken who wanted to become a hero like me, and with his quirk and talents it was all but guaranteed. Seeing others who have tried and could still fail just as much as I do, that was new. Then I thought about you, Shinsu. The other teenager is looking at him now, and Hitoshi feels almost blinded by the sheer willpower hiding behind those eyes. How I wanted to approach you, to befriend you, to give you someone who you could talk to. I knew if I had befriended you, our dreams would clash, that there will be conflict. Hitoshi can't believe what he is hearing, because if this was true, if he was correct at where Midoriya was getting to, so in that moment that I had walked up to you with Kensei-san behind me, I had already decided. Even then, Midoriya was already this blinding. If I had befriended you, I would help you become a hero, no matter what. If we were to clash in the sports festival, it's only after we have worked together as a team to defeat everyone else in that tournament. And only then would we be there as rivals fighting for who would get the chance to be the first between us and our steps to become heroes. Hitoshi can't help it. In that moment, staring in those eyes that are so bright and pure, Shinsu Hitoshi places his hands over his face, bends over, and laughs. Midoriya's serious expression shatters. "Yeah, Shinsu, did I say something weird? Yeah." Hitoshi keeps on laughing, even as he starts to lose his breath, and soon Midoriya does not sound just confused. He is irritated. "Come on, Shinsu, I was being completely serious here." Hitoshi interrupts, catching his breath and wiping tears out his eyes. "Call me Hitoshi, and don't you go saying it'll be rude again. Kensei already calls me by my first name, without honorifics at that, and I've already explained to you how it'll be even ruder to deny this kind of request." Midoriya blinks wildly, and part of Hitoshi just enjoys how he has left the other teenager in shock. What brought this on? Shin-er, Hitoshi, removing the glare from his face at nearly being called just Shinsu again. Hitoshi then smiles. He is smiling a lot more often these days. And to think, it's been only a week. Kensei was right. Hitoshi never really stood a chance in not befriending the boy before him. "You've crushed me, Midoriya Izuku. Before, you've just defeated me, but this time you have crushed me." Hitoshi can almost see the question mark over the other teenager's head. What does that mean? Never mind that. If you don't get it now, you'll never get it. Hitoshi shakes his head at that question, much to the puffed-up cheeks of the other teenager. "And you know what? I think I'm going to take a pointer from Kensei's ways and just start calling you Izuku now." "Not you too, Hitoshi." Midoriya, or rather Izuku, complains very loudly, and Hitoshi feels no regret whatsoever. The other teenager then turns to mumble to himself in the corner. "Honestly, why is it that I never managed to get to choose what others would call me? Well, at least it's still my name at this point." "What was that?" Hitoshi asks, honestly curious at that last part. "Other than me and Kensei. Who else calls you that familiarly?" Apparently forgetting that he was supposed to be mad at Hitoshi, Izuku immediately replies with just a bit of exasperation. "It was Kaken. He calls me Deku." Immediately remembering the explosive teenager in question, as well as catching the connection between Izuku's name and its alternative interpretations, part of Hitoshi immediately rises up in a protective rush of anger. "That is horrible of him. How could you honestly even call him a friend?" Who could call the person before Hitoshi in this moment useless? It was far from it, even. Midoriya Izuku was a godsend, and deserved to be protected. Oh god, Hitoshi was turning into Kensei. Forget his quirk. Was this the real power of the teenager before him? To make people want to protect him? That would honestly be more terrifying than Hitoshi's own quirk. And even under its effects, Hitoshi can't find himself wanting to go against the flow. That's just how Kaken is like. You shouldn't mind him. Izuku has a tired smile as he says that. And Hitoshi wants to punch a certain blonde once for it, maybe even twice. In fact, ever since 8 months ago, especially once we've actually entered Yui, he's gotten better. He actually tried to help me in his own way when we had that talk. This headache feels familiar. Oh right, this was also when Hitoshi had first met Katsuki Bakugo. Again, Izuku, if what we saw earlier this week was better, I honestly don't think I want to know how it had been before. Make that punching thing thrice. Hitoshi knows he had said so himself before that he was going to ignore the other teenager if he ever met him again. But he didn't make a promise, right? Izuku wasn't even there when Hitoshi said it. "Really, you shouldn't mind it," Izuku says, and Hitoshi wants to respond no, I should, but then he sees the sad look on Izuku's face and he keeps quiet this time. That's just how our relationship is. If it's going to change, it's between just me and him. And to that, Hitoshi has nothing to say. If the other teenager does not want to talk about it yet, Hitoshi won't force him. After all, Midoriya had been kind enough to let Hitoshi be alone with his own thoughts when he needed it. So instead, he extends his hand, enclosed in a tight fist. Izuku looks at it in confusion. "Midoriya Izuku, I have heard your words, and starting today, I'll be repeating them. You have spoken of us being friends even with our conflicting goals, of us working together to become heroes despite the dilemma that only one of us can do it first. So, let me state this, you've said we'll be rivals, right? So let us be rivals. Rivals that work together, grow together, and fight together." For a moment, Izuku just blinks at Hitoshi, and then a confident smile blooms on the other teenager's face, making his own fist. Izuku bumps his with Hitoshi's. "Yeah, let's be rivals, Hitoshi-kun." And just like that, several days pass by, bringing them closer to the date of the trip to USJ. Ever since Kensei left Hitoshi and Izuku alone to have a talk, he had noticed the two of them being significantly closer. The sudden shift in how they referred each other was an obvious hint, as well as a very frustrating one. It took Kensei a ridiculously long time to get Izuku calling him by his first name. And now Hitoshi got the privilege to be called that with just one talk. It was so unfair. But there was the more subtle things, like how Hitoshi had taken to carrying water bottles for both him and Izuku whenever they exercised together. When Kensei loudly complained of favoritism, Hitoshi shot back some nonsense about how Izuku was closer to Hitoshi's level of fitness than Kensei and thus deserved the water more. But Kensei knew better. And how about how Hitoshi and Izuku started comparing each other's records? Not even Izuku did that with Kensei, nor did they smirk at Kensei like they did with each other whenever they went past one another during laps. Before it had first happened, Kensei didn't even know Izuku could smirk. Surely, the difference between their physical capabilities wasn't that important, right? There is something different between the two these days. Kensei knows it. But for now, Kensei needs a rest. Or 3, maybe with a soft pillow on top. Kensei, get up. You aren't going to be developing muscles like that, lying on the ground, you know. Kensei glowers at the smirking Hitoshi over his head, with his position of lying on the ground being that it made the other teenager loom over him. Excuse me for not being an exercise maniac like you, Hitoshi. Only you and Izuku can keep up with this kind of regime. No offense, Izuku-chan. Some offense taken for the chan. The green-haired member of their group shoots back from where he is drinking the bottle of water Hitoshi had given him. Again, favoritism. And part of Kensei feels proud of him for doing so. Izuku then turns to their 4th member, Yamato. Do you think you need a rest too? Yamato Megumi, the only female member of their group and normally the meekest of them 4, only shakes her head even as she jogs in place with a decisive look on her face. I guess that just leaves you incapable of keeping up with us, Kensei. Hitoshi continues looming over Kensei, which makes him want to throw the figurative pillow Kensei had at his head. I guess we'll be leaving you here for now, shall we? The word deadweight hangs in the air, remaining unsaid, but everyone knows what Shinsu is implying anyway. Alright, that is it. Oh hell no, I'm not going to give up here if you guys are going to be like that. I'm not going to be the one left behind. Raga, just like that, Kensei shoots up and starts running off ahead of the other 3. Idly, he could hear Izuku yelling something along the lines of "That's precisely why you keep getting tired before us, Kensei-san." But Kensei can only grin even as he pants on ahead with their training. Because this was fun. And in the end, that was what was important. That Kensei had fun with his friends. And though they have taken to also training in the afternoon, like what they were doing now with Toshinori-san's homework and always leaving Kensei ridiculously tired by the end of the day only to wake up early next morning. To Kensei it is worth it, because before this, it had been different for Kensei. So very, very different. Yui was never a choice for him. It had always been a consequence of his past actions. When their laps finally end and Kensei is left entirely pooped, Shinsu shakes his head at Kensei before he and Izuku soon turn to Izuku's notes, presumably because they hadn't exhausted themselves enough that they wanted to study as well, while Yamato quietly sits on a nearby bench, looking at the birds in the trees. The moment Kensei looks at the girl in question, she turns to meet his eyes and Kensei looks away with a red flush coming over his face. He thinks he would never be able to get over that particular reaction of his around girls. Hey, Kensei-san, do you think you can help us with this? Kensei immediately turns to Izuku, exhaustion forgotten as he feels slightly offended, as though you even have to ask. I agree. Normally, other people would ask for more details about the request first before agreeing. Hitoshi shakes his head, even as Kensei approaches the two of them. What if the request was going to be something embarrassing? Would you still do it? Kensei looks at Hitoshi as though the other teenager is dumb. It's precisely because it was Izuku who asked that I agreed so easily. Hitoshi-san, I know that he won't do something like that to me. Plus, since when have I been normal? Touché. Hitoshi actually grins, while the same Izuku they are talking about quietly blushes as Kensei looks over their shoulders to see what they were apparently doing. What he sees surprises him. Is that Kensei's eyes go wide as he looks at the name written below the object drawn on the page. Is this going to be for you, Hitoshi? Hitoshi actually sounds a bit defensive as he asks, yeah, what about it? Because if you're going to say no, then say no, why would I? This is going to be awesome. Kensei doesn't see the shocked smile on Hitoshi's face as he pulls his face closer to the notes, actually taking it from Izuku's grip in the process. If you want me to make something like this, of course I would. A thought comes into Kensei's mind, and he calms down a bit. He turns back to Hitoshi and Izuku. Though, you do realize that you could ask this of the support department instead of me, right? They have the tools, and I may be good at making things because of my quirk, but they still have more experience. I still have a lot to learn before I can match up with them, you know. Hitoshi and Izuku exchange looks, and it is Izuku who answers. This was actually going to be for the upcoming sports festival. And well, in that case there would be a conflict of interest, don't you think? Kensei nods at that. I see. And you guys have read the regulations involved here? Because unless we're sure Hitoshi can actually carry this into there, I won't agree. Because this would take a lot of work and money, and I wouldn't want to waste our time if Hitoshi can't use this anyway. Hitoshi nods. Yes, we have. Then we have a deal. Kensei grins, before pulling in the other two in a shoulder hug. Come on, you guys. This will be so much fun. Actually, in that case, Izuku, if I get the chance, can I make something for you too? After all, Hitoshi's not the only one who will be entering the festival. Before Izuku can actually open his mouth, Hitoshi beats him to it. Yes, he would be glad to. Great. Kensei can see Izuku sending wild looks being sent to him and Hitoshi in turns, but he ignores it. After all, he knows just how frustratingly selfless the other teenager could be, and as it turns out, so could Hitoshi. He then hears a giggle from behind them, and Kensei turns around to see Yamato looking at them warmly. Kensei can't look at that without feeling guilty, so he looks away. All right. Kensei first starts off softly, his voice weak, until he repeats it again, much louder this time. All right. Hitoshi, Izuku, Yamato, stay here. I'm going to talk to some people I know so I can make this and what I have in mind for Izuku-chan, so I'll have to go. Without waiting for the others to reply, Kensei starts running off again, tiredness completely forgotten. I'll be off outside campus, so head on to the dorms without me. All right. Izuku-chan, that means you don't get to seclude yourself inside the Quirk archives again. Hitoshi, consider the particular job of preventing that from happening as your payment. Now, bye. Wait, what? Kensei, get back here. With a delighted hum, Kensei moves to exit the Yui campus, leaving behind the protection of the Yui barrier behind him as the sun lowered itself below the horizon. Normally, Kensei wouldn't be out of Yui this late, but putting his hands to good work like this, sign him up. Kensei pumps his fists as he walks through the city streets. Yeah, this is good. This is going to be great. He doesn't notice the 4 pairs of red eyes that open to follow him from a nearby alley. The following day, Toshinori arrives to his usual meeting place with his students to see not 1, nor 4 early teenagers waiting to expect him. Instead, they are only 3, and Izuku has tears coming out of his eyes. Young Shinsu is glaring at nothing in particular, a look of guilt bitter across his face, and Yamato, on the other hand, also seems to be close to following Izuku's footsteps and crying. Toshinori already feels bad about this. Where is young Katsura? Toshinori-san, Kensei-san is missing. We asked the dormitory managers, but he never returned to our dormitory last night, and the last thing we knew was that he was heading outside campus. Toshinori does hate it when his worst instincts, the gut feeling trained by years and years of being the #1 hero, are proven correct. Chapter 6, Locate Part 1. Toshinori immediately has all 3 of his students follow him into the heroic department main building. Normally, he would have never done this, never have revealed himself to be part of the heroic department staff, as it might lead to Izuku figuring out he was All Might before he was ready to reveal it. But this was different. Kidnappings and disappearances were incidents where timely action was absolutely crucial. And if young Katsura had indeed disappeared since the night previous, Toshinori couldn't waste time forcing Izuku and the rest into the regular channels just for his own secret. Not when Toshinori knew young Katsura could already have been taken out of Matsute for worse. So instead, he sends a brief message ahead of himself to his fellow staff members, and tells them just enough to know what happened and what particular bits to keep secret. To be safe, he also contacts Naomasa about a potential disappearance of a male teenager of young Katsura's description. Toshinori-san. Izuku sobs, even as he leads them through streets and doors. Where are we going? To the person who I know can help you 3 the most. Toshinori replies, ignoring the shocked looks he gets from his fellow heroes as he goes past them with 3 teenagers on tow. He glances at Izuku, and thinks about what it says about the situation that his protege was outright ignoring his heroes. Come, let me take you to Netsu. This particular statement shocks out young Shinsu out of his simmering rage. Netsu, you mean our principal? How is it that you can get us to meet him with so little notice? Goes unsaid, and Toshinori ignores the implied question. Instead, he nods at the direction of the person that he sees coming near them. And soon none other than Aizawa Shouta is beside Toshinori and studying the teenagers behind him. Toshinori, the racerhead calls, and Toshinori raises a hand in greeting. The other teacher summarily ignores it in favor of looking at Toshinori's followers. What is this? We've just received a message about you coming in with some secret students of yours, and as far as I knew 30 minutes ago, you didn't have secret students. Shinsu is staring at Eraserhead with wide eyes. It looks out of place of the normally serious teenager's face. Toshinori chuckles, despite how grim the situation is, hence it being secret. Is Principal Nedzu already at work? Ever since he got the message. Eraserhead nods, before he grunts. Toshinori, you're already horrible in teaching 1 class, and now you're adding 3 to that. Izuku seems to be much calmer now, because he actually speaks up, or rather, mumbles. Toshinori-san has been only good to us. I know, that's precisely his problem. The other teacher looks at Izuku with an unreadable expression on his face, before shaking his head. But no time to waste dilly-dallying. Let's get to the principal's office immediately and help you three find your friend. Maybe this will be just a false alarm and this friend of yours is currently doing something stupid on the streets like many of those at your age. Eraserhead leaves with those words. Toshinori has to shake his head at it, especially when Shinsu speaks, sounding very offended. How can he say that? Kensei might be a bit of a rebel and irresponsible, but he is not the kind to. Toshinori opens his mouth to correct the misunderstanding, but it is young Yamato who speaks first. It was his best-case scenario. He was trying to comfort us. All three of the males in their group turn to Yamato, who is staring at Eraserhead as he goes. If Kensei-san is only doing something like that, then we wouldn't have to worry so much. He would be scolded, yes, but that is far better than him being kidnapped or worse. Izuku moves to give the girl a hug, even if he looks just as terrified for their friend. And Toshinori can only feel astonished at the insight young Yamato had shown for someone she had just met. Was this related to her quirk, or was it pure ability to judge other people with a glance? Either way, Eraserhead was right. They should get to Nezu immediately. Let's go, young ones. We have to find your friend. Toshinori will always be in awe of Nezu at work. And from the looks of it, so are his students when he brings them to his office. Though, calling it office might be a bit inaccurate with the current state of affairs. After all, with the huge wall of monitors, normally hidden away by a movable barrier of cement, and with Nezu busy at work with his small hands rapidly fiddling on some kind of holographic control panels as clones and clones of ectoplasm tried to cope with their principal's fast pace, it looked more like some kind of one-animal war council as opposed to an office you would expect out of an education institution. Toshinori observes the monitors, the constant humming of their cooling units providing a constant background noise, only to once again boggle at how the principal is managing them concurrently with nothing to show for it other than the occasional deep breath. Not a single one shows the same thing. And every 5 seconds a monitor would change to show another part of the school, having been connected to the entirety of Yui's security system. Ah, Toshinori, nice to see you come in. Despite his own words, the principal doesn't look away from what he is doing, nor does his pace slow down even for a second. Pause moving quickly even as he spoke. I see you've brought the three involved here, correct? Midoriya Izuku, Shinsu Itoshi, and Yamato Megumi. Odd collection of students you have there. Not that I could say anything about that with my fur. The three students still seem to be at all with the dozens of monitors Nezu is taking care of, so Toshinori nods at who he knows to be the original ectoplasm, who by the looks of it was fighting off a headache while Eraserhead helped him in pulling out piles and piles of paperwork. Toshinori cuts to the chase, not wanting to distract the principal more than he had to. Have you found the last records we have of young Katsura's whereabouts? Who do you think you are asking? Of course I have. Nezu replies, still non-stop in his actions as he pulls up the relevant video feed in the monitor closest to Toshinori's face. First thing I did. Nothing new. It only confirms your student's statements that he left the campus yesterday evening. Right now, I'm merely collecting enough data to collate a usable model for his behavior using my high specs, and with these last few videos, all at once, the monitors start changing channels, flickering with no identifiable pattern Toshinori could identify except for young Katsura appearing here and there for every single one of them, changing and changing so fast that even Toshinori has to look away or risk getting a headache. He shifts his attention back to Izuku. His friends have looked away as well at this point, but the teenager hasn't, at least, not yet, and the boy mutters a mile a second. Unbelievably, young Izuku was catching up with what nobody else in this room could even cope with, leaving Toshinori a little in awe. Just how smart was the boy, when it wasn't about his own quirk? Nezu suddenly announces, collation complete. The monitors turn black. The room gets a lot darker for it, the screens previously providing most of the illumination in the room, but Nezu easily fixes that with a clap of his paws, which makes the lights turn on from the ceiling again. Shaking their heads from the interruption, Eraserhead and Ectoplasm quietly return to their work of sifting through stacks of paperwork, though Toshinori could see the cloning hero heave a sigh of relief at finally being able to disperse a few of his clones. Sometimes Toshinori pities Ectoplasm for being repeatedly harnessed by their principal as a one-man workforce. My, we have a pretty energetic child we have here, don't we? Nezu turns away from his screens, once again catching Toshinori's attention, as well as those of the students in the room. But this is certainly strange. Katsura Kensei-kun here doesn't like to leave the campus that much, unless he is accompanied by his friends. What could have changed that yesterday? Shinsu looks a little flabbergasted at what just happened. Principal, did you just manage to understand Kensei's habits just from that? It hasn't even been an hour since you found out that he was missing. Oh right, his students weren't exactly aware of the principal's capabilities. Or at least, young Shinsu wouldn't, considering his failed entrance exam into the heroic curriculum was when Nezu normally would be introduced to the general education department. Strangely enough, it isn't any of the teachers that explains what the principal had just done. It is none other than Toshinori's own protege, whose muttering fills the entire room now that the cooling fans for the monitors have been turned off. I remember that Principal Nedzu told us of his above-human intellect back then during his speech. Before that I thought he was just had a very major mutant type of quirk, but as it turns out the actual quirk's name is high specs. That would imply a very high capability of analysis and absorption of data. And judging from his multitasking earlier, it's not merely as limited as that. In fact, if that's the case, what is the limit in Nedzu-sensei's mental capabilities? Could it be that as long as he is provided with sufficient correct information he can simulate anything? How about his multitasking skills? At most, people can only multitask 2 or 3 objects at a time. But all of those monitors were concurrently and independently working with each other. Normally, people can't do that, even if they have the capability to multitask to that degree. So is that the effect of that holographic interface? Why are you looking at me like that, Toshinori-san? That is when Toshinori realizes that his jaw is hanging. Having been slowly doing so the more his student spoke. It takes him a force of will to regain his bearings. But at least Toshinori was better than most of the room. The other 2 students have taken to gawking at Izuku, while Eraserhead and Ectoplasm have actually stopped what they were doing to stare at Toshinori's protege. And considering what Toshinori knew of the sheer force of Aizawa's professionalism, it is tantamount to ludicrous gibbering in Aizawa terms. The principal breaks the sudden silence that has resulted of Izuku by applauding. Amazing, amazing. I would have not thought that someone else, at least not as young as a freshman, could easily understand so much of my own quirk mere seconds at their first exposure to it. Tell me, Midoriya-kun, what else did you see earlier on my monitors? Izuku looks very unsettled at the attention he is suddenly getting from everyone else in the room. So Toshinori approaches the boy and places a hand on his shoulder with a squeeze. The teenager gives him a nervous look, but then he manages to finally answer. Well, at first I thought that they were random, but then I realized that over time you were learning how to identify where Kensei-san would be for those particular times. Izuku starts, at first sounding reedy before slowly becoming more and more confident as he saw nobody was about to interrupt him. At first, the videos only had a few frames worth of sightings of Kensei-san. But then they started to become more like a continuous movement, where one monitor would show where he had been 15 minutes ago only for another monitor to show where he went 10 minutes later. Honestly, I don't understand how you were doing it. Only that you were, and that I knew that changing the monitors so quickly would be impossible with only 2 limbs, so I then thought that was part of what your interface was for. Izuku trails off with that, looking red, and the next moment Nedzu turns to Toshinori. He has never seen the principal so envious. Toshinori-kun, if you hadn't already claimed Midoriya-kun here, I would have adopted him as my own protege just then. Very few have managed to keep up with me as much as he has just done. Izuku makes a loud squeaking noise at that bit of praise, while Toshinori has to fight off the urge to wrap his arms around the teenager as if to claim him as his in front of the principal. After all, Nedzu knew that Toshinori was planning to make Izuku the next symbol of peace, right? He wouldn't do that, right? Just to be safe. Toshinori makes a mental note to warn Izuku of approaching the principal in the future. Just to be safe. I wouldn't fit in that anyway. Nedzu stops from approaching his seat again to turn around. Toshinori has a similar reaction, returning his attention to Izuku. Izuku says this with all of his will. If I were to become Nedzu-sensei's student, that would be as part of management, right? So I wouldn't fit in, because I would be a hero. Toshinori feels so proud of Izuku in that moment. So does, strangely, Nedzu, who looks as though Izuku had just handed him the world. Once more the other teachers are turning their heads at Izuku, while the teenager's friends flank the boy with identical proud smiles on their faces. It would be, wouldn't you? There is an odd gleam in Nedzu's beady eyes as he says this, before the unidentified mammal shakes his head. Anyways, enough about that. Despite all of the pain I feel in my heart in this moment from that pure-hearted rejection. Oh, woe is me, but very well, can someone finally answer my question? As to why he had been out of campus alone so late. Shinsu answers. This time looking calmer, Kensei wanted to make something for us, but as he didn't have access to the resources of those from the support department, he wanted to talk to someone he knew in the city. From what I know, he was heading towards a place named the Metal Gengai Workshop. Nedzu puts his paw on his chin at that. Oh, I know that workshop. It's an independent and trustworthy place. I trust that you have already tried contacting the owner of the location. Young Shinsu nods, once again proving to Toshinori that it wasn't just Izuku who had plenty of intellect. As soon as the moon came up and Kensei still hadn't returned, I decided to look up the place and call the owner. From what they told me, however, they never arrived. That is exactly when we talked to the dorm managers about this, but our worries were only waved away, claiming that Kensei was just another irresponsible teenager breaking curfew. No wonder young Shinsu looked so angry when Toshinori first saw him. The young man probably understood the importance of time in a possible kidnapping. But even when he reported to the proper authorities, nothing happened until Toshinori came. From another part of the room, Toshinori notices Eraserhead dig his head deeper into the paperwork he was sorting. I'll be correcting that issue as soon as this case is done. The principal announces that with a terrifying air surrounding him, but Toshinori can't find it in himself to pity the fools that were apparently the managers of an establishment that housed students. Toshinori served justice as a job. Was there any surprise? I suppose I could try and convince the police department to cooperate with me in this. Found it, Principal Nenzu. Nenzu is interrupted from finishing his words as finally Ectoplasm digs out a stapled piece of paper. From what Toshinori could see of it, is that young Katsura's student record? Why do we still use paper for that? Before Toshinori knows it, his mouth is already asking for him. The next moment, the other teachers shake their heads at him in synchronicity. What? Toshinori, despite all of your achievements, there are indeed some things even you don't know. Eraserhead says this dryly, approaching them with the student record in hand as he brushed bits of paper off himself. Strangely, there are some in his hair, which take far more time to remove. Here you go, Principal Nenzu. Why, thank you, Eraserhead. Why young Shinsu suddenly starts coughing, Toshinori will never figure out. And as for things he still hasn't figured out, so why? Why do we still use paper? Toshinori-san, digital storage is faulty and prone to electric tampering. It is Izuku that answers for him, making Toshinori feel like the roles have suddenly reversed, with the number of potential quirks related to technology, or even just brilliant hackers in general. I suppose Yui would have to keep their most important of information on paper, which means the student records. I won't be surprised if there is some digital alternative to this though. Correct you are, Midoriya Izuku. The principal announces, before muttering to himself as he takes out a pair of spectacles to read with. It's just that it'll take far longer to turn on the particular computer that handles that database, with it being so slow because of all the protections we put in there. We normally only use it when we need to pull up large groups of records as opposed to just one. Toshinori nods, understanding that. So, what is it that is on that piece of paper that you wanted to know? I was rather curious at what I saw behind his actions, and aha. Here it is. Nenzu pulls his head up from the paper he had been reading. He has that look on his face, the one Nenzu that always takes on whenever he had confirmed something unsavory. Katsura Kensei has a laundry list of a criminal history. What? What? Hitoshi can't believe what he is hearing from the principal's mouth. They're all minor offenses, like petty thievery and breaking into locked places, but they're here. As it turns out, he had previously been a homeless orphan taken in as some kind of sidekick by a villain. And when said villain was finally taken and he was adopted 3 years ago by a police officer. What? Said police officer then signed him up for Yui, hoping that it'll be good for him. You actually know that police officer personally, Toshinori-kun. His name is Tsukachi Naomasa. The man who managed to bring them all here makes a shocked face at that. Considering Toshinori-san's appearance, it is honestly a little horrifying to look at. Tsukachi-kun, he had a son. As if on cue, his cell phone suddenly starts ringing. Hitoshi bathes in the sound of a horribly cheery ringtone before the man has picked up the call. Tsukachi-kun, Toshinori-san starts speaking to the other side of the call. And for a moment, Shinsu is hit by the staggering amount of coincidence that has just happened before he shakes it off. Yes, no, I didn't know. All right, we'll help find him for you. Once the teacher has finished the call, he turns to their principal. That was actually Tsukachi-kun on the other side of the phone. He just got to what I sent him earlier, and is now on the lookout for his adopted son on the streets. So far, they have found nothing, not even in their home, but he will be willing to coordinate with us in this case. Nenzu-sensei replies, that is good to hear. In retrospect, before this I should have seen the signs of Tsukachi Keiji in the boy. We have coordinated with him enough to recognize that kind of hardworking capability Katsura Kensei has shown us. I'd better take this chance to access Matsutafu's security cameras now that I have the permission. Not that I need it, per se, but otherwise that'll be rude and I don't tolerate for rudeness. It is as though the world has tilted 45 degrees around Hitoshi. Kensei is not only just a past criminal. 3 years. Wouldn't that mean that Kensei was at most 13 when he was finally adopted? Just how young had he been when he started doing crimes then? But also the adopted child of a policeman. One who was apparently also influential enough to mobilize the police force at his own request, and to be known by name by the staff of Yui at that. Izuku, the other remaining male member of Hitoshi's group, has his hand on his chin. So that's why Kensei-sen had that look on his face whenever we talked of his quirk possibly being used in detective work. Hitoshi had noticed that too. In retrospect, it was indeed a sign at the other teenager's background. Still, he then sighs to himself. At least, with this we know that there will be a higher chance of finding him. That is, if he wants to be found. Everyone turns at once to the principal, who had returned to working on that console of his. Hitoshi watches for a moment how all the monitors turn on again, this time showing a dizzying array of random streets in Matsutafu, before he has to turn his eyes away or risk getting a headache. Hitoshi can't believe that Izuku could keep up with it. Just how did the other teenager do that? But back to what the principal was saying. Principal Nenzu, what do you mean by that? It is Toshinori-san that asks the question. But the principal refuses to look at them. His paws and beady eyes still busy at work, but somehow, for some reason, Hitoshi gets the feeling that there is this sense of disquiet coming from the strange mammal. The thing is, it comes to me, the possibility of Katsura-kun not wanting to be found. Nedzu answers, eyes still on the monitors, in light of his background, my observations, his quirk, as well as the mounting evidence before me, a theory comes to light that perhaps we aren't looking for a kidnapped teenager. It doesn't take Hitoshi even a second to see what the principal is trying to get to. He first demands in a whisper, what? The other people in the room turn to stare at him, only to see his mounting rage. Because the principal is talking about Kensei. Stupid and overly protective Kensei, just second in place behind Izuku in managing to break through Hitoshi's walls, and trying to imply that, what? Do you even hear yourself right now, principal? Something suddenly wraps around Hitoshi's arms, around his body and even his mouth, and Hitoshi doesn't have to look to recognize whose it is, for it is none other than Hitoshi's most respected hero that is binding him now, tamping down on Hitoshi's quirk like everyone else that Hitoshi had met before he met Midoriya Izuku. Eraserhead. Talk about how pedestals fall. At this sudden turn of events, Izuku is staring at Hitoshi and at the principal in turns, obviously not understanding. Hitoshi-kun. What is happening here? What is it in what the principal said that made Hitoshi-kun so mad? I don't know what's happening. Classic Izuku. So used to seeing the best in people, he was blinded to the possibility of the opposite happening. Toshinori-sen approaches the other teenager, and behind him, Hitoshi could see Yamato simmering in quiet anger but also knowing better than Hitoshi to actually voice it. He has a pained look on his face as he explains. Midoriya-kun, the principal is suggesting that perhaps young Katsura isn't as kidnapped as we thought he was, that he is hiding away from us on purpose. Shinsu-kun didn't like what the principal was implying with that, so Eraserhead took precautions so he wouldn't do something he might regret. As if to warn Hitoshi, the scarf wrapping around him tightens for a moment. In exchange, Hitoshi does his best to send Eraserhead a glare. But what is it that principal implying? And why would Kensei-sen hide from us? We're his friends. Yamato moves to Izuku's side, and just like that, Hitoshi knows that the girl has told Izuku exactly what the principal was trying to say. Because in the next second, his mouth opens, no words come out. And when he turns to the principal, everything about him conveys shock and disbelief. It is a sad moment that Hitoshi would ever see Izuku look betrayed. Katsura Kensei, age 16. Quirk, scan. The principal doesn't even try to look at them. Personality, cheerful and playful, slightly irreverent, bit of a rule breaker. All of these are what I have observed of him for the past hour. But once you add in his criminal history, one can realize what the boy can do. Yamato speaks up, her voice also not believing that the principal was trying to implicate Kensei of all people with this espionage. With his quirk, with just one touch he can figure out the structural weaknesses and blueprints of everything he touches with his hands, and that includes the locations of cameras. Once he has information, it'll just take him one trip outside the school to give our enemies all they need to know about Yue. Isn't it strange that when I looked at last night's records of Matsutafu, all I saw of Katsura-kun was him entering an alley and with no further video evidence of him ever coming out. Toshinori-sen sends the principal a sharp glance. Is this true, principal? The principal nods, still not looking at them. Yes, I found it a few minutes ago, and I have suitably notified the police department as to its location. They are on their way, though I highly doubt that they'll find him there. He does have a good way of judging how to avoid being caught by cameras after all. But Kensei-sen will never do that. Izuku yells, sending betrayed looks at their teachers. He wouldn't throw our friendship away to help villains. He's loyal, protective, and kind. He even promised Hitoshi and me that he would be helping us prepare for the coming sports festival. Hitoshi tugs at the cloth wrapped around himself, and with a warning look, Eraserhead sets him free. With a glance around the room, Hitoshi could see that all the teachers in the room other than Nedzu are giving them a chance to defend their friend first before jumping to conclusion. The principal is finally looking at them. Time to defend his friend. Reining in his anger more this time, Hitoshi asks, have you ever talked to Kensei even once, Principal Nedzu? Because that isn't what you would expect of a spy. And don't you trust this Tsukachi-san, Kensei's father, to not have sent Kensei here as a student of Yui if that could happen? Instead of answering Hitoshi, the principal counters with a question to Izuku. Midoriya-kun, try to be impartial as you answer this. You've managed to catch up with me earlier when I sifted through our video records of Katsura-kun's daily life here in Yui. So tell me, what did you see of Katsura-kun's daily habits? Izuku immediately answers, every day, he would explore more and more of Yui, despite some of the places not where students should go be, but that's not real proof that he's a spy. That's just Kensei being his usual self. Kensei-sen will never betray us. The principal doesn't make any response to that, favoring to turn to Hitoshi instead. Shinsu-kun, tell me, what would you expect of a spy? To be rude and unhelpful to everyone, or to do the opposite and be well-liked enough that people would trust him enough to leave him alone? Hitoshi opens his mouth, only to gnash his teeth the next second. All he can say as he looks away is, Kensei is not a spy. Another person holds his hand, and Hitoshi lifts his head to see Yamato also there with him. She repeats, to the principal, he isn't. As for Tsukachi-san, he's not a perfect judge of character. Nenzu, for his previous words, actually looks sympathetic to them. None of us are. You three can be right, or you can be wrong, but we have no way to prove it other than to find Katsura-kun. And it isn't that I'm already saying that he's a spy. All three turn as one to look to the principal. Like I said earlier, the evidence is mounting in support to it, but it's just that, a theory. It's only a theory, but as the person in charge of this establishment of learning, I have to look at all the possibilities and consider them all valid. And if anything, this just gives us more reason to find Katsura-kun again. Hitoshi grinds out, then why don't you just go and find him? I was about to. Despite the rudeness Hitoshi knows he had just done. Nedzu-sensei only smiles at him before turning to one of the quiet teachers in the room. Ectoplasm. Ectoplasm stands straight at the voice filled with command. Yes, Principal Nedzu, I'd like for you to personally call in all of the available heroes in the campus. This is now also a matter of informational security. And whether or not Katsura-kun could be a spy, I want him found. Once the other teachers are here, I can coordinate you all to do a proper search in Matsutafu. Roger. Hitoshi closes his eyes, about to just give and wait for the professionals to do their work, when Midnight barges into the room as Ectoplasm is about to leave it, with 13 Sensei behind her. Principal Nedzu, we've found something in Katsura-kensei's dormitory room. What now? What is it? Nedzu-sensei asks, far too calm for the argument he just had with Hitoshi. What did you find, Midnight? Is it something that we can use to pinpoint Katsura-kensei's location? No, it's a withdrawal letter from Katsura-kun on how he is leaving Yui. Again, what? Chapter 7, Locate, Part 2. What do you mean withdrawal letter? Shinsu-kun loudly asks, and Toshinori can't say that he hadn't been about to do the same thing despite the rudeness. Kensei wouldn't make something like that. The principal only turns to Midnight in question with his paw extended. I surmise you have this supposed letter with you. And 13, thank you for accompanying Midnight for this. I know you have classes at the moment. The space-themed hero in question shakes their head in response. I can't be absent for this. Katsura-kun, as well as the 3 students here in this room, is one of my best students. For something like this to happen is significant enough for me to be here. The rest of my class will do well enough without me for the meantime while we sort this out. As for Midnight, the flashy teacher laughs before she pulls the letter out of her somewhere. As though you have forgotten who I am, Principal Nedzu. Of course I do. Here you go, Principal. While this is happening, Ectoplasm leaves the room in the corner of Toshinori's vision, presumably to follow Nedzu's earlier orders before Midnight interrupted him. Principal Nedzu does quick work of the envelope binding the letter, and soon Toshinori has to lean behind the principal to get a glimpse of what is written. When he does manage to get a short read of the letter, Toshinori winces. It indeed looks to be a withdrawal letter, supposedly penned just the day before. Izuku and the other teenagers are also leaning in for a look. But thankfully Nedzu is short enough for them to easily get it. Had the principal been taller, Toshinori knew his protege would find it more difficult considering his height deficiency. But as it was, they seemed to also manage to read the paper. Shock and recognition is on their faces, and in that moment, Toshinori knew that the letter was certainly in Katsura-kun's handwriting and not just a fake. This certainly looks like it was written by Katsura-kun himself, Nedzu-sensei starts. But the question is threefold. Did he write this of his own volition? When was this written? And when did it get to Katsura-kun's dorm room? Because depending on the answer to those questions, we could try to weasel out Katsura-kun's location. Izuku is muttering to himself, Kensei-san wouldn't do this. Kensei-san wouldn't do this, and Toshinori has to place his hand on the boy's shoulder to comfort him once again. On the other hand, young Shinsu is quickly regaining balance as soon the teenager speaks up. That's right, Shinsu remarks, with not just a bit of hope. Even if Kensei could have written this, it could have been under duress. Not only that, as Kensei's trip outside of the campus was entirely unplanned, it couldn't have been written prior to yesterday afternoon, as that was the time he decided to leave the campus. That means that the letter was planted after Kensei left, by whoever disappeared him. He could have written it beforehand, if he was already planning to leave. Eraserhead points out, much to the glare of the purple-haired teenager. When you said that he wanted to do something for the rest of you three, it could have been just a convenient excuse he had taken advantage of. Even if you didn't ask him, he could have just left and nobody would know any difference. And you do realize what you are implying here is that some villain had infiltrated Yui without us knowing it. Seeing an argument coming on, Toshinori puts himself in between the two. Now, Shinsu-kun, Aizawa-sensei, the two of you are providing equally valid points, though I believe they might be unnecessary as I'm well aware that Nezu-sensei has a way to check when the letter was written. The principal only nods when Toshinori turns to him. Indeed. Now, please keep quiet for a moment while I try to analyze this piece of paper. Just like that, Nezu starts sniffing the paper, making his questionable species all the more evident as everyone in the room was explicitly reminded of just what their principal was again. The sniffs are loud and many, with the principal's button nose pressed to every nook and cranny of the paper, and soon the snuffling ends, with Nezu-sensei having a victorious look on his face. The ink on this paper is barely dry. Indeed, this letter that was supposed to have been written yesterday was in fact written just this morning, at most 4 to 5 hours ago. I would check it again for a more accurate time, but I have more important things to do with this information. Toshinori's eyes go wide. But that means, indeed, in retrospect, I should have checked this earlier. Nezu is already moving back to his control panels for the monitors. In my rush to see what had happened yesterday, I have forgotten to see whether anybody went to Katsura-kun's dormitory room today. We did, 6 hours ago, to check if Kensei finally came back and nobody was there. Shinsu-kun volunteers, with nods from both Izuku and Yamato. If the letter was written after that, then it must have been placed after we went there. When was this? 5 a.m. It is Izuku who answers, also holding Toshinori's hand over his shoulder with a squeeze. Normally, we train with Toshinori-san around 4 a.m. But as today is a Saturday and the classes start later than usual as a result, every Saturday we head for where we would meet Toshinori-san around 6. At that point, we were still holding hope that Kensei-san would be there like nothing was wrong. The door was locked, Yamato adds quietly. We begged for one of the janitors to open it up for us, but when we finally did, our friend wasn't there and there wasn't any sign of forced entry. Hitoshi-san asked for the janitor's help with Midoriya-kun while I stood guard in front of the room. All of it must have taken us an hour to do so. Thank you. The principal nods. That information would help me choose which cameras and at what times to focus on, which should be. 5 monitors lit up, showing a hallway in 2 perspectives, a flight of stairs, the street in front of the boys' dormitory, and then the street behind the dormitory. From the first 2 monitors, it becomes evident enough to Toshinori as to where Katsura-kun's room could be. After all, he recognized that specific group of students standing in front of it. It feels odd, watching ourselves through a screen. I've caught glimpses before, when Nezu-sensei was looking for data on Kensei-san earlier. But Izuku murmurs before trailing off as the teenager shook his head. No, I must focus. For Kensei-san. Toshinori moved his hand from the teenager's shoulder to the top of his head, messing Izuku's hair for a bit with a smile before pulling away, and then speeded up a little. Nezu-sensei does something with his paws and the video feed accelerates to a much faster pace. The story, as was told by his students earlier, unfolds before Toshinori's eyes and Toshinori shares his attention across all of the screens. Now, as for anything suspicious, stop right there in that last monitor. Nezu-sensei does as he is told. Good job as always, Toshinori-kun. I knew I could depend on those sharp eyes of yours. Where is it? Shinsu-kun asks, studying the monitor in question. I don't see anything, even with it paused. No surprise. I barely caught it myself and only after he pointed it out. The Eraserhead murmurs, before pointing his finger on the upper right corner of the screen. Principal Nezu, can you rewind this for a few seconds? Much slower this time, please. It becomes much easier now to see the faint silhouette of movement in the corner of the video feed. However, even then, the image is too vague to give any idea as to who it might be. Interesting. Nezu notes, voice calculating. It is really as though this person here knows where the camera is located, as well as to precisely what kind of lighting is necessary to produce this effect. Too early in the morning, and it'll be dark enough for the night vision mode to kick in. Too late, and there'll be enough illumination to pick them up. The silhouette we've captured here is precisely timed and meticulously planned to be as inconspicuous as possible. Had we not been under watch, I would have thought it to be a mere aberration in the feed. Shinsu-kun is staring at Toshinori now. Oh, and just how did you manage to catch that so quickly? You didn't even take multiple tries. Well, Toshinori could explain that as all might. He had to learn how to react at subsonic speeds. He was just that fast, to the point that it became necessary unless he wanted to make imprints of himself in buildings where he went, as simple as that. However, as the teenagers before him didn't know that he was All Might, Toshinori doesn't know what to say. He just did. In the end, that's all that matters. Eraserhead shuts the teenager down before he could go any further. And while Toshinori has been rescued, as a result Shinsu-kun is glaring at the other hero again. Now watch. I believe you'll see something interesting here. Principal, please proceed with the feed, though still is slow. Nedzu plays the video again. And Toshinori watches as the silhouette fiddles Katsura-kun's window open before jumping through it just as his students leave the room. And from there he could see the shadow landing in a roll in front of the closet beside the window. Once that was done, the silhouette closes the window, though not before the morning sun shows his face. Katsura Kensei's face, adorned with a smirk. Well, I suppose that answers where your friend had been a few hours ago, doesn't it? Despite his own shock, part of Toshinori has to fight the urge to facepalm at his coworker's bluntness. Midoriya-kun, I apologize that it has come to this. Izuku can't believe it. The staff of Yui, Izuku's heroes, had concluded that Kensei was a traitor, a spy for the villains, someone who came into the school just to collect information on every weakness and strength of Yui, someone who only pretended to be everyone's friend just to take advantage of them. When Toshinori-san of all people turned that expression on Izuku, as though the man was mourning for something that Izuku had lost, Izuku couldn't believe it, never would believe it. After all, Kensei-san is his friend. He would never betray them, Izuku knows it. 13 Sensei, being their homeroom teacher, is the one who accompanies them to the general department dormitories. When they finally arrive, with Izuku staring at the door that just hours ago hid behind it his friend while they were looking for him, the space hero sees them three just stand there frozen outside Katsura Kensei's door and shakes their head. I didn't know Katsura-kun as much as you three, but as your teacher I feel like I should have prevented this from happening. If I had foreseen this, I would. Don't. 13 Sensei stops, turning to Izuku who has just interrupted them despite his usual respect for his heroes. Midoriya-kun, don't say that, never say it. Izuku shakes his head, knowing that to his teacher it looks like explicit denial of current circumstances, because it is, and Izuku will never accept the possibility of Kensei being a traitor. You're wrong. Nedzu-sensei is wrong. Kensei-san will never do this. The look of pity his teacher sends him is palpable, even through the space helmet. Izuku just give it up, alright. Izuku contorts in shock at the speaker, because this isn't one of their teachers. This is Hitoshi-kun, Kensei-san's most vehement defender when they were in the principal's office. Accepted. At this point, I have. Kensei's betrayed us, Izuku. He has. The evidence is undeniable, Izuku. His letter tells us that he is leaving Yui. He snuck in behind our backs and didn't even try to talk to us for one last time even though we were looking for him. Hell, apparently for years he had been working for a villain. Izuku, I know you think Kensei is a friend, IT thought that too, but really we all should face reality and accept it all as it is. Izuku is about to yell at the other teenager for giving up when he is tackled in a tearful hug by Yamato, looking herself like she had also given up. But the moment they touch it becomes obvious that she hasn't. That Hitoshi-kun hasn't because, play along. Immediately, tears come into Izuku's eyes. There's no difficulty in doing so. After all, Izuku has always been a bit of a crybaby. And the past hour has all been emotional moments after another, so pulling up tears is easy and looking like he is breaking is even easier. And no, Izuku attempts to say the words he has to say, because 13 is still there, watching them. But he can't, not even in pretend. Don't say that, Hitoshi-kun. Kensei-san will never betray us, he would never. And just like that, Izuku does really break into tears. In the end, saying them or not saying them doesn't matter, now that Izuku's weeping, crying so loudly as though he is breaking down. Yamato just pulls him deeper into her hug, and Hitoshi-kun comes close to also wrap them in his arms. It's a comforting moment, a tearful moment, and more importantly, it's a moment that feels too private for their teacher to watch. I'll be out for a moment, 13 announces, bowing their head away from them. We'll find Katsura-kun, don't you worry about it. As a traitor goes unsaid as the teacher leaves. As soon as he does leave, the betrayed look on Hitoshi-kun's face disappears. Yamato squeezes Izuku in her hug for one last second before she pulls away, and Izuku does his best to wipe away his tears. Less than a minute ago, they were mourning. Now, they are prepared to find their friend. None of them, after all, had really thought Kensei had actually betrayed them for 1 second. What do we do now? Hitoshi-kun starts, and Izuku is thankful, so thankful for the other teenager because without him and his quick thinking they would have been trapped and unable to do nothing. At this point, I don't want our teachers to be the ones to find Kensei. They'll only think he's a traitor, even if he denies that claim personally. The answer easily comes to Izuku, finally wiping away the last of his tears. Then we find him ourselves. It's as simple as that, Hitoshi-kun. We're really just going to do this then? Yamato asks, her voice quiet but no less stubborn than they are. We're just going to deny all the evidence implicating our friend, sneak out from under our teacher's eyes, find Kensei-kun, and try to clear his name. Izuku glances at Hitoshi-kun. The other teenager meets his eyes and nods, knowing what Izuku is about to say. Of course we are going to do all of that and more. He's our friend, correct? Now, let's go sneak out of this dormitory. Yamato, can you check the windows and see if there's a path we can climb down on? Please check if 13 is nearby while you're at it. Yamato nods, determined to help, and leaves to do her part. Itoshi-kun turns back to Izuku. You're the one closest to Kensei. You're the first that met him, and I'm fine with having you in the lead for this. You decide where we go. Izuku nods, before closing his eyes and thinking where his friend could be. Kensei would hardly stay in the school, especially if whatever made him do this is enough that the other teenager actually snuck in behind their backs to leave a withdrawal letter behind him. None of the teenager's usual haunts would also make sense, because if Kensei didn't want to be found, he wouldn't go to where people would first check. The other teenager was smart enough to know that, especially if he was indeed the son of a police detective. So, that only left. Izuku opens his eyes, finally coming to a decision. By that time, Yamato has returned. Itoshi-san, Midoriya-kun, I think I have found the path Kensei-san used to sneak into his room. I don't know where all the dormitory's cameras are, so it is our best hope. 13-sensei is standing guard in front of the dormitory building. This is our chance. Not before Izuku makes his choice. Itoshi-kun shakes his head, before glancing back at Izuku. Have you come to a decision now? Where do you think Kensei would be? In retrospect, it's easy to come to this conclusion. Just hours ago, Kensei revealed that he had no qualms sneaking into places he knows where his friends would be. Where they are about to go also doesn't have cameras, so it would be a good hiding place from them. We're going to the park where we train with Toshinori-sen every morning. He heads there every day with us, and usually by this time we head there for our afternoon training. Kensei-sen will be there, I'm sure of it. The other teenagers nod. Itoshi-kun announces, then we leave. Toshinori frets. Did he do the right thing, asking for the teenagers to be sent back to their dorms? After all, after the reveal of Katsura Kensei smirking, part of Toshinori still can't believe it. But that was certainly not the look of someone being threatened or coerced to do something. In the camera feed, the teenagers had such a fit that Toshinori had to make them leave so they could do their work. But still, did Toshinori do the right thing? Or should he have supported them further in their belief that their friend would never betray them? Have we finally assembled? Principal Nedzu asks unnecessarily, considering the amount of people in the office. Toshinori takes this time to snap out of his thoughts. For the lack of response, I'm going to take that as a yes. Now, I believe everyone has copies of the handout I passed. I believe we all do. Power Loader responds, looking a little uncomfortable to Toshinori considering how cramped it is in the room. Can't we do this in a more proper location? We do have meeting rooms for this. We simply don't have the time for that. Eraserhead shakes his head from he is standing beside the principal. From what we have concluded, every moment wasted is possibly more losses than we could count in the future, especially if the villains get their hands on the information we are talking about here. Snipe raises his head from the handout he is reading. From what I am reading here, this is a copy of one of our students' records. Though the history of minor felonies is interesting, I don't understand why the principal has deemed him important enough for nearly all the heroes in Yui to be involved in finding him. It's because we believe him to be a spy, Principal Nedzu announces, and as one all the heroes turn towards him. Look at what is written down there as his quirk. Scan. Snipe reads the handout again. And the next moment, Toshinori could see the man wince beneath his mask. Now I see why. I wonder though, how is it that we've managed to catch this happening so quickly? From this letter you've appended to his file for us, it looks as though his escape had been meticulously prepared. It's because he erred in his choice of companions while he was here. Nedzu answers, before turning to Toshinori, who has been leaning quietly in the corner for a while now. All Might, care to explain your quick involvement in this? Enough dilly-dallying and time to get this over with. Katsura-kun had approached, because saying that the boy befriended Izuku felt like some sort of guilty confession. One of the students in general education that I have been interested in for a while now. And the boy introduced him to me as well as two of his other friends. So when Katsura-kun disappeared, they saw it fit to report it to me directly. Present Mike chuckles loudly at that. Of course, who better to report a disappearance to than the symbol of peace himself? This spy of ours certainly had some bad luck, picking people to fool. Don't you remember the message earlier this morning? Vlad King asks the other teacher rhetorically for one moment before turning back to Toshinori. These students only know you in this form, don't they? Which is good, because I don't think it would be a good idea for a spy to find out your current appearance. All Might. The heroes in the room wince as one at that. Yeah, that would have been a bad thing to happen. Toshinori could only feel the same. When he met young Katsura, Toshinori had toyed with the thought of trusting him, as well as the other two of Izuku's friends, with the secret of one for all in the future. And back then the teenager seemed so trustworthy. Now though it is clear that Toshinori didn't know Katsura-kun as well as he thought, that nobody did. It is a sobering thought, and a reminder of how easily secrets could be leaked. In any case, due to All Might knowing the student personally when he disappeared, he brought the case directly to me. Principal Nedzu speaks again, bringing the attention back to him. Without that, this case would likely have not been brought to our eyes so soon, if at all. With the withdrawal letter found in Katsura Kensei's room, we would have been easily fooled into not checking into the boy's background. In that light, it was indeed kind of lucky, Toshinori thinks, without the involvement of Izuku in this affair, leading to him finding out Katsura-kun's disappearance so early and looking into it so vehemently. Katsura-kun could have disappeared into thin air without anyone noticing. Maybe, in the future, Toshinori can comfort Izuku with that fact. It would have to be after the boy came into terms of young Katsura's betrayal, though. These are my orders. Nedzu continues. I would be handing you all sectors of Matsutafu to patrol in search of Katsura Kensei, as well as within Yui, as the teenager has certainly proved himself slippery enough to dodge my security. I will not let him think that he could hide in my school because nobody expected him to hide in it. Any questions? Cementos raises his hand. Yes, Cementos, what do you have in mind? Who is it that Katsura Kensei served as an underling for in the past? The blocky teacher asks, causing the other teachers to turn to him in interest. Cementos, seeing this, explains, this file only contains the fact that this villain had been apprehended 3 years ago before Katsura Kensei was taken in and adopted by a police officer. Knowing who he served before could give us an idea as to where he might be or who he could approach for protection in the villain's side. Nedzu nods at that, clearly in thought. Indeed, this does sound like something we should know. Wait for a moment while I access the police records for this. The principal turns back to his devices, and for a moment, Toshinori contemplates on the idea Cementos posed. After all, if there was something they still didn't have any idea on, it was in the terms of motive. Just what motivated Katsura-kun to leave behind a happy life with friends, good grades, and a family with Tsukachi-kun to return to the side of the villains. Part of what convinced Toshinori before of the teenager's trustworthiness was his tight bond with Izuku, or so it seemed then. Katsura-kun's relationships with Shinsu-kun and Yamato-kun hadn't been that bad either. Toshinori knows how hard it is to find friends that you could get along with that well. Surely, Katsura-kun valued them too, as much as Izuku and the other two cared for him. From what 13 told him a few days ago, their group had been chosen for the trip to USJ. Not that Toshinori could forget, considering his goal to apologize formally as All Might to Izuku on that day, but that also meant Katsura-kun also had pretty good grades, so it wasn't a question of being pressured academically either. And Toshinori knew Tsukachi-kun personally. They still haven't told the police of their conclusion that Katsura-kun was a spy. He knows that Tsukachi-kun wouldn't react well at that kind of accusation aimed at his son. But other than that, Toshinori also considers Tsukachi-kun as a close friend and personally thought that he would be a good father before. All in all, that meant that it wasn't a matter of school, friends, or family. So why did Katsura-kun betray them for the villains then? Was his motive something abstract, like a philosophy the teenager followed that had led him to turning to villains? Or was it something simple, like wanting to cause chaos or money? Maybe, now that the principal is looking into the villain that led to Katsura-kun doing crimes in the first place, Toshinori can find his answer. Maybe once they know who turned Katsura-kun, they can know why. But then Nedzu does something Toshinori doesn't expect. The principal, in the middle of reading something in one of his monitors, squeaks. Oh no. The principal's next few actions are a rush. Suddenly, all the other monitors in the room bloom a light, showing places in Yui again. Then, just as Toshinori manages to catch up with exactly what the principal is doing, the screens suddenly shift locations, this time all over Matsutafu. What is it, Principal Nedzu? Eraserhead asks, leaning in from beside the principal, who never before has looked so frantic. What did you find? I made a mistake. I made a mistake. The people in the room suddenly straighten at that announcement. Toshinori himself can't help but lean in, hoping against hope that Katsura Kensei isn't a spy. He's just a victim of the circumstances that are pushing us to conclude him a traitor. Relief seeps in through Toshinori's entire being. Izuku's friend really didn't betray them then. This was not some traitor or spy they were dealing with. This was just some teenage boy needing their help, needing to be rescued from whatever was making him do all of this. But in that case, why was the principal so frantic? This is from the information of which villain Katsura Kensei worked under as an underling, correct? Vlad King asks, sounding a little unnerved at how the principal was acting. Who is this then, that you've found to be the one so important that you've thrown your previous theory out? The principal doesn't answer them, continuing with his monitors before finally, all of them go out. As the soft background whir of their cooling fans leaves the room, Nedzu slowly turns to them. No, not them, but Toshinori. Toshinori-kun, I hope you know where your students could be now. Toshinori doesn't have a good feeling about this. What do you mean, Principal? Hash. Izuku can only stare in betrayal at the teenager before him. Katsura Kensei has never looked so sadistic. With one hand, he is juggling with a monkey wrench, and the other is holding another. An evil smile is on his face, reaching from ear to ear, and Hitoshi-kun is unconscious, held in the arms of a crying Yamato as she tries to tend to a bruise located near the other teenager's temple, having taken a blow meant for Izuku before they realized something was wrong. Kensei-sen, why? It's not him who answers, but Yamato. No, Midoriya-kun, don't be fooled. That is not Kensei. He's under control of somebody else's quirk. When I touched him, I heard him screaming for us in his mind to run. I tried to warn you and Hitoshi-san, but by then it was too late. Of course the telepath would be the one to ruin the fun. Kensei-san tests, and Izuku can only shake with the realization that his friend was under control of somebody else. Talk about a useless quirk making things boring. Izuku, in that moment, remembers something Kensei-san said before. I've got some bad memories regarding being the victim of some quirks. Back then, it was about Hitoshi-kun's brainwashing, but this is certainly more than that. Somebody else, somebody cruel is using his friend, forcing him to do things against his will. Something rustles in the nearby bushes, and soon, Izuku and Yamato are watching a figure leaving the safety of shadows. 4 pairs of red eyes, 8 in total, are placed symmetrically beside one another in one head. Just as many arms, covered with thick and curly hairs, are positioned on both sides of a vaguely human body, with sharp claws on their tips. Their mouth is a pair of fangs. Their body, separated into 2 sections, the lower being an insect-like abdomen, with carapace covering their legs like smooth dark armor that glowed in the setting sun. Their enemy does not look human. No quirk Izuku had ever seen before has managed to make someone look like a monster straight out of a story. I remember this particular villain's modus operandi. He likes to toy with his victims by making them fight one another using his quirk, before killing them once they are weak. Like in Katsura-kun's record, he had been taken in 3 years ago, but just last month he got broken out by someone else. Toshinori's mouth is dry, so what you mean is, your students could be his next target, and I've just checked the security cameras. Your students have snuck out from under 13's watchful eyes and have already left the protection of Yui. They're vulnerable, especially since this villain likes to attack his victims when it is dark, and the sun just set half an hour ago. Toshinori transforms in all might, steam starting to cover his entire frame. Who is this villain? His name is Tsuchigumo. Come to my web. Tsuchigumo speaks, voice sounding like a swarm of insects and echoed by Kensei in front of Izuku, said the spider to the fly.